Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shoes, or rather the wooden clogs, of an ordinary farmer on a quiet 18th century English farm. Picture this. No alarm clocks, no coffee machines, no central heating. Just you, a drafty stone cottage, and the absolute certainty that if you don't get up before dawn, your livestock will make their displeasure known in the most organic way possible. The rhythm here is dictated entirely by sunlight and survival, where every calorie you burn must be earned back from soil that honestly couldn't care less about your ambitions. You probably won't survive this if you're used to snoozing your phone alarm 3 times, but let's see how you handle a rooster with an attitude problem and winter mornings that freeze your breath mid-exhale. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are right now. I'm always curious who's winding down their day with these stories. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in absolute darkness. Not the soft darkness of a modern bedroom with its glow of phone chargers and streetlights bleeding through curtains, but the profound, velvety blackness of a world without electricity. Your cottage has exactly 2 rooms, this main chamber where the family sleeps in a shared loft space above the ground floor, and the animals below. Yes, you share your living quarters with livestock. The cows and pigs generate heat, you see, and in January, when frost creeps through every crack in the wattle and daub walls, you'll be grateful for their warm, hay-scented presence, even if the smell is somewhat agricultural. The straw-stuffed mattress beneath you crackles as you shift. It's been 3 months since you changed the straw, and you're pretty sure something small and multi-legged has taken up residence near your left shoulder blade, but that's a problem for later. Right now, your body knows, with that infuriating certainty only routine can teach, that it's time to move. Outside, you can't hear the rooster yet, which means you've woken naturally at the correct hour. Your internal clock has been calibrated by years of this exact schedule, more reliable than any mechanical timepiece, which you definitely can't afford. The first challenge is getting vertical without waking your wife and 3 children who sleep pressed against you for warmth. The cottage is cold, genuinely bone-deep cold. You can see your breath even here in the loft. The fire downstairs died sometime around midnight, reduced to barely glowing embers that you'll need to coax back to life. Historians still argue whether the health problems of rural labourers stemmed more from poor nutrition or from simply never being warm for 6 months of the year, but right now you're casting your vote firmly in the hypothermia camp. You ease down the wooden ladder, skipping the 3rd rung because it creaks like a dying cat. Your bare feet hit the packed earth floor, and the cold shoots up through your legs with vindictive enthusiasm. Fun fact, most 18th century rural homes didn't have wooden floors, just hardened dirt, maybe mixed with ox blood or chalk for durability. You'll put your shoes on in a minute, but first you need to deal with the fire before your fingers go completely numb. The hearth is the heart of everything. You kneel before it, feeling for the poker in the darkness, and carefully shift the ash covering last night's coals. A faint orange glow rewards your effort. You add a handful of straw, kept dry in the corner specifically for this purpose, and blow gently. Too hard and you'll scatter ash everywhere. Too soft and nothing happens. It's a Goldilocks situation that you've performed roughly 7,000 times in your life. The straw catches. You add small twigs, then progressively larger pieces, building the fire with the focused attention of someone who knows that failure means starting over with a flint and steel, which on a cold morning is about as fun as it sounds. Within 10 minutes you've got actual flames, and the cottage begins its slow transformation from meat locker to merely uncomfortable. Now comes the truly delightful part, getting dressed. Your everyday clothes hang on a peg near the fire, a long linen shirt, woolen breeches, thick stockings, and a waistcoat that's been patched so many times it's basically a quilt with aspirations. Everything smells like wood smoke because everything always smells like wood smoke. There's a quirky little detail most period dramas skip. You probably change your shirt once a week if you're prosperous, less often if you're not. The shirt is what gets washed. Your outer layers might go months between cleanings. The general theory is that linen absorbs sweat and protects the expensive wool. The reality is that by Wednesday, you're fairly pungent. Your shoes, sturdy leather things that cost you a week's wages 2 years ago, get buckled on with cold, stiffened fingers. Then the coat, the hat, and finally you're ready to face the actual work. The animals below are stirring now, hearing your movement, anticipating breakfast. The cow lets out a low, pointed moo. She knows the routine as well as you do. You unlatch the cottage door, and the pre-dawn air hits you like a slap. It's that perfect hour when night hasn't quite released its grip, but dawn is sending out warning notices. The village around you is still silent, just dark cottage shapes and the occasional chimney smoke beginning to curl upward as other families kindle their fires. Your breath plumes white. Frost crunches under your shoes. The barn is 30 yards away, which sounds like nothing until you're doing it in the dark, in the cold, knowing that you'll make this exact walk twice today, every day, for the rest of your life. But there's something almost meditative about it too. This solitary moment before the demands begin, when the world is quiet and yours alone. The barn door protests on leather hinges. Inside, your ox shifts in its stall, and the chickens roosting in the rafters mutter sleepy complaints. You can smell hay and manure and the particular warmth of animal bodies in an enclosed space. Time to begin. The cow stares at you with those large liquid eyes that somehow manage to convey both accusation and boredom simultaneously. Her name is Buttercup, though you're not sentimental enough to say it aloud. She's a small, hardy breed typical of English farms. Nothing like the massive dairy animals that will be engineered 2 centuries from now. She produces maybe 2 to 3 gallons of milk per day, which sounds modest until you remember you have to extract every drop by hand. You grab the 3-legged stool and wooden pail, position yourself on her right side and begin the rhythmic squeezing that your forearms will feel for the next hour. The technique is specific. Thumb and forefinger create a seal at the top of the teat. Then you compress downward with the other fingers in sequence, forcing the milk into the pail below. Get it wrong and you're just annoying the cow. Get it really wrong and you're getting kicked into next Tuesday. The milk comes in warm streams, hitting the pail with that distinctive tinny sound that gradually softens as the liquid level rises. It's oddly meditative work, this repetitive squeezing, and your mind drifts while your hands operate on autopilot. The barn is warming slightly from animal body heat, and the sound of milk hitting wood creates a peaceful rhythm that almost makes you forget it's barely 5 in the morning. Here's a fun fact. That milk you're collecting is almost certainly going to kill someone eventually. Not through any fault of yours, but because 18th century dairy hygiene is basically a suggestion rather than a rule. Tuberculosis spreads readily through unpasteurized milk, and nobody will figure out the connection for another 100 years. But right now, in this moment, you just know that milk fresh from the cow tastes rich and creamy, and if you let it sit for a day, the cream rises to the top, and your wife can skim it off for butter. Buttercup shifts her weight, tail swishing at some invisible fly despite the cold. You murmur something soothing, not because you're a cow whisperer, but because irritated cows withhold milk, and you don't have time for her attitude this morning. The pail is nearly full now, frothy and warm. You'll strain it through cloth later to remove the inevitable bits of hay and other materials we won't examine too closely. The chickens have noticed you're awake and are making their opinions known from the rafters. You have about a dozen hens and 1 rooster who takes his job extremely seriously. They roost up high at night for protection from foxes and rats, and now they're ready for breakfast and to begin their important work of converting kitchen scraps into eggs. You haul yourself up from the milking stool, your knees cracking in a way that suggests you're older than your 32 years, and carry the milk pail carefully to the dairy corner of the barn. This is a slightly cooler section with stone shelving where you keep yesterday's milk in covered crocks. The cream has indeed risen overnight, thick and yellowish. Your wife will deal with that later. Right now, you need to secure this fresh milk before moving on to the next delightful task, mucking out stalls. If you thought milking was glamorous, let me tell you about manure management. It's not just shoveling, it's strategic resource allocation. That cow patty you're stepping over, that's next year's garden fertility. The horse manure from your neighbour's better-off farm, that's premium heating material when mixed with straw and dried into bricks. Nothing gets wasted in this economy, including excrement. You grab the wooden shovel, worn smooth by years of this exact activity, and begin the process of scraping soiled straw from Buttercup's stall. The smell is, let's say, robust. Modern people often romanticize farm life, picturing themselves in flowing linen shirts frolicking through wildflower meadows. Nobody pictures themselves in a dim barn at dawn, shoveling animal waste into a wheelbarrow while questioning their life choices. Yet here we are. The manure pile outside the barn is a point of pride, actually. Historians still argue whether the quality of a farm could be judged by its dung heap. But in practice, a large, well-maintained manure pile signals prosperity. It means you have enough animals to generate it, enough land to use it on, and enough sense to stockpile it properly. You're basically composting on an agricultural scale, letting it rot down over months until it becomes the black gold that makes your vegetable garden actually produce. The pigs are next, and they're making absolutely certain you know they've been waiting. You have 2 breeding sows and their half-grown offspring from last spring's litter. Pigs in the 18th century aren't the pink, plump things of modern farms. These are rangy, semi-feral creatures with bristly hair and a talent for destruction. They're kept in a separate pen with sturdy fencing because given half a chance, they'll root their way to freedom and terrorize the vegetable garden. Their slop is a magnificent mixture of kitchen scraps, spoiled grain, away from cheese-making and whatever odds and ends aren't fit for human consumption. You haul the bucket from the cottage. Your wife prepared it last night and dump it into their trough. The pigs attack it with the enthusiasm of, well, pigs, snorting and shoving each other in their eagerness. Despite their chaos, pigs are remarkably efficient protein factories. You feed them garbage, they turn it into bacon. It's almost alchemy. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Some farmers genuinely believed that pigs could see the wind. Like actually see it as a visible force. The theory was that pigs would gather straw and run around building nests before storms because they could perceive atmospheric pressure changes as physical entities. Was this true? Obviously not. Did it stop people from treating their pigs' behaviour as weather forecasts? Absolutely not. The chickens are now staging a full revolt at being ignored. You scatter their grain, mostly barley with some oats mixed in, and watch them descend from the rafters in a flurry of feathers and indignant clucking. They're free range in the sense that they have the run of the barn and yard during the day, pecking at insects, seeds, and anything else that holds still long enough. Your job is to check the nesting boxes for eggs. You find 7 eggs this morning, which is decent for winter. Come spring when the hens are laying actively, you might get 10 or 12 daily. You collect them carefully in your gathering basket, checking each one for cracks. A cracked egg needs to be used immediately. A good egg can be preserved in lime water or straw for weeks. Eggs are currency in the rural economy. You can trade them at market for things you can't produce yourself. The half-light has shifted now. Dawn is properly arriving, painting the barn's interior in shades of grey and amber. You can hear the rooster finally finding his voice, announcing the obvious to anyone within a half-mile radius. Other cottages are showing signs of life, chimney smoke thickening, the sound of a distant door, someone's dog barking. Your morning animal care is complete. You're cold, you smell like a barn, your back already aches, and you haven't technically started the day's real work yet. The fields are waiting, but first, breakfast, brief as it will be. You gather the milk pail and egg basket and begin the walk back to the cottage, where you can see candlelight now glowing through the small window. Your wife is up, and soon the children will be too, and the cottage will fill with the noise and chaos of family life before everyone scatters to their assigned tasks. Just another morning, just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. The cottage has transformed in your absence. The fire is roaring now, throwing dancing shadows across the walls, and your wife has the porridge pot already suspended over the flames on its iron hook. She's been up for maybe 10 minutes, but in that time she's dressed, braided her hair, woken the 2 oldest children and started preparing the meal that will fuel everyone through the morning's labour. If you tried to document everything she accomplishes before noon, you'd need a separate 20-section series. You set the egg basket on the table, a scarred wooden plank supported by trestles, and carry the milk pail to the corner where the dairy equipment lives. The routine is so automatic you barely think about it. Your wife nods acknowledgement, already reaching for the straining cloth. Words aren't necessary at this hour. You've been married 11 years, and morning routines have achieved a choreographed efficiency that would make a ballet company jealous. The porridge is oat-based, thick enough that the wooden spoon stands upright when she tests it. Oats are the backbone of northern English diets, cheaper than wheat, hardier than barley, and able to grow in soil that would laugh at more delicate grains. You'll eat oat porridge for breakfast most days, with slight variations depending on the season and what's available. Today it's been cooked with water and a pinch of salt, because milk is too valuable to waste on mere cooking when it can be sold or made into cheese. Your 7-year-old son climbs down from the loft, hair sticking up in 6 directions, looking like a small, confused scarecrow. The 5-year-old daughter follows, still half asleep. The baby, just over a year old, is in your wife's arms, having presumably been nursing while she simultaneously managed the porridge. You honestly don't know how she does it. The leading theory is witchcraft, but the good kind. Everyone settles onto benches around the table. There's a brief moment of something approximating prayer, more habit than fervent devotion, and then you're eating. The porridge is served in wooden bowls, each person using their own spoon. Spoons are personal items in the 18th century, often carried with you when you travel. The phrase, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, isn't just about wealth, it's literal. Rich people get silver spoons at birth. You got wood, and you've been using the same carved spoon since you were 10. The porridge is hot, filling, and monumentally boring. You've eaten this exact meal roughly 8,000 times in your life, and you'll eat it 8,000 more if you're lucky enough to live that long. There's no sugar to sweeten it. Sugar is an exotic luxury that costs more per pound than your shoes. Honey exists, but it's being saved for when someone gets sick or for special occasions. So you eat plain oat porridge and pretend it's delicious. But wait, there's more. Your wife sets out the accompaniments, a small piece of hard cheese, cut from the wheel, aging in the dairy corner. It's sharp, crumbly, and slightly salty. The product of last week's cheese-making session. Cheese is concentrated nutrition, protein and fat in a portable form that doesn't spoil quickly. You'll eat cheese with almost every meal, in quantities that would alarm your modern cholesterol levels, but which make perfect sense when you're burning 4,000 calories a day doing manual labour. There's also bread, but calling it bread is generous. This is yesterday's barley loaf, now achieving a texture somewhere between firm and potential roofing material. Barley bread is the peasant standard. Wheat bread is for those higher up the social ladder. You tear off a chunk and dip it in the porridge to soften it, a technique perfected over years of eating bread that could double as defensive weaponry. Historians still argue whether the dental problems of the era stemmed more from poor nutrition or from trying to eat bread that could crack walnuts, but your money's on the bread. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The average rural labourer in 18th century England consumed between 3 and 4 pounds of bread per day. Not over a week, per day. Bread was calories, and calories were survival. Everything else on the table was basically a condiment to make the bread more interesting. The butter situation is where things get political. There's a small crock of butter on the table, yellow and rich, but your wife is guarding it like a dragon guards gold. Butter is a cash crop. Every pound you spread on your own bread is a pound you can't sell at market. The market is 4 days away, and that butter represents actual money. Coins you can trade for things you can't produce, like iron nails, salt, or a new milk pail when the current one finally gives up. So you get butter, but not much. Maybe enough to make the barley bread somewhat less punishing to your jaw. Your son eyes the butter with the calculation of a military strategist planning an assault. "Can I have more butter?" he asks, demonstrating the eternal optimism of children everywhere. "You can have more porridge," your wife replies, which is the 18th century equivalent of "we have butter at home." The boy sighs with the weight of the world on his small shoulders, but accepts another ladle of oatmeal. The small beer makes its appearance now, yes, even for breakfast. Small beer is weak ale, about 2 to 3% alcohol, and it's what everyone drinks because the water from the village well is questionable at best. The brewing process kills most of the dangerous microorganisms, making beer literally safer than water. Your children have been drinking small beer since they were weaned. Before you judge, consider that coffee and tea won't become affordable for ordinary people for another few decades, and you can't exactly pop down to the corner store for orange juice. The quirky historical detail? Some families genuinely believed that eating breakfast made you soft and lazy. There was a whole moral philosophy suggesting that real men worked for 3 hours before eating, because food first thing in the morning encouraged slothfulness. You're eating breakfast anyway because you're not an idiot, and because trying to plough a field on an empty stomach is a recipe for either fainting or murdering someone with a garden hoe. The meal is over in perhaps 15 minutes. There's no lingering over coffee, no leisurely scanning of newspapers, no checking your phone. You eat, you fuel up, and you move on. Your wife is already clearing the wooden bowls, stacking them for washing later. The baby is returned to a wooden cradle near the fire. The older children know what's expected. The boy will come with you to the fields. The girl will help her mother with the endless domestic tasks that keep the household functioning. You stand, brush the crumbs from your breeches, and reach for your hat. The sun is properly up now, pale winter light slanting through the small window. Outside, you can hear the village coming to life. The distant sound of other farmers heading to their fields, someone's cow lowing. The blacksmith's first hammer strikes ringing across the morning air. Your stomach is full, your body is warm, and the work is waiting. The fields don't care if you're tired or if your back hurts or if you'd rather stay inside by the fire. The fields are neutral, patient, and utterly indifferent to your preferences. Time to meet them. The plough waits where you left it yesterday, leaning against the stone wall that marks the eastern boundary of your 10-acre holding. 10 acres sounds generous until you remember that maybe 6 of them are actually arable, the rest being common grazing land, hedgerow, and a marshy bit near the stream that's only good for watercress and mosquitoes. Still, it's yours to work. Well, technically it belongs to the lord of the manor, and you're a tenant, but let's not ruin the morning with feudal property law. The plough itself is a masterpiece of agricultural engineering, assuming your definition of masterpiece includes mostly wood and held together by hope. It's a heavy-wheeled plough, the kind that's been revolutionising English farming for the past few centuries. The mouldboard, that curved wooden piece that actually turns the soil, is reinforced with iron strips your father had the blacksmith add 20 years ago. The share, the blade that cuts into the earth, is also iron, and it's currently about as sharp as a butter knife after a decade of hitting rocks. Your son trails behind you, carrying the goad stick. He's at that age where farm work is transitioning from watching father to actually helping, though honestly his main contribution today will be staying out of the way and maybe learning not to walk directly behind large animals with powerful back legs. The oxen are kept in a separate paddock near the barn. You have 2, technically a team, though team suggests coordination they don't always demonstrate. Their names are Steady and Bastard, though you only use Steady's name in polite company. They're enormous creatures, castrated males bred for strength rather than speed, with the temperament of elderly philosophers who've seen too much to get excited about anything. Getting them into the yoke is the first challenge. The yoke is a curved wooden beam that sits across their shoulders, distributing the weight of whatever they're pulling. You've done this roughly 1,000,000 times, but oxen have long memories and sometimes decide that today is the day they'd rather not. Steady, true to his name, walks placidly over and positions himself. Bastard makes you work for it, because of course he does. Come on, you ridiculous animal, you mutter, using the goad to encourage him into position. The goad is basically a long stick with a pointed end, not for beating the animal, but for gentle poking when verbal commands fail. Bastard finally cooperates, and you secure the yoke, attaching the wooden pin that keeps it in place. The chains that connect to the plough get fastened next, and suddenly you've got roughly 2,000 pounds of livestock ready to drag a wooden contraption through resistant earth. The field you're ploughing today is 3 acres of heavy clay soil that you left fallow last year. Crop rotation is crucial. Historians still argue whether the 3-field system or 2-field system is more efficient, but in practice you do what works, for your land and your labour capacity. This field grew oats 2 years ago, rested last year while you grazed sheep on it to fertilise the soil with their droppings, and now it's wheat's turn. Here's the problem with clay soil. When it's dry, it's like concrete. When it's wet, it's like trying to plough through peanut butter mixed with glue. Right now, after last week's rain and this week's cold, it's at that perfect consistency where it's merely difficult instead of impossible. You've got maybe a week of good ploughing weather before either it freezes solid or it rains again and becomes unworkable soup. You position yourself at the rear of the plough, hands gripping the wooden handles. Your son stands to the side, clutching the goad, trying to look competent. When I say walk on, you tap Steady on the shoulder, you instruct. Not hard, just enough to remind him he's working. You call the command, walk on. The oxen lean into the yoke. The chains go taut. For a moment, nothing happens. That eternal second where physics is deciding whether to cooperate, and then the plough lurches forward, the iron share biting into the earth. The sensation is immediately transmitted up through the handles into your arms, shoulders, and back. The plough wants to do 3 things simultaneously: dive deeper, veer left, and possibly achieve sentience and run away. Your job is to keep it moving in a straight line at the correct depth, which requires constant pressure and adjustment. It's like arm wrestling a drunk bear while walking backwards through an obstacle course. The clay parts reluctantly, the mouldboard turning it over in a dark ribbon of earth. Small stones make grinding sounds as they scrape past the iron. The soil here is rich when properly managed. Clay holds nutrients well, but it's brutal to work. Every step forward is earned. The oxen lean into their work with patient strength, their massive shoulders rippling, breath coming in steady huffs that send clouds of steam into the cold air. You've got roughly 200 yards of furrow ahead of you before you turn and start the next pass. At walking speed, fighting the plough every step, this will take maybe 15 minutes. You'll need to make approximately 80 passes to cover the whole field. Do the math. That's roughly 20 hours of this exact activity spread over the next several days, assuming nothing breaks. And things break constantly. The wooden frame can crack if you hit a buried rock wrong. The iron share can snap if the stress hits just right. The chains can shear through their links. Medieval and early modern farming is basically an ongoing negotiation with entropy, and entropy is winning. Your mainstream historical fact for this section: the heavy plough, introduced to England centuries ago, was revolutionary because it could handle the dense wet soils of northern Europe. The lighter Mediterranean ploughs couldn't cope with clay. This technological difference literally shaped settlement patterns and agricultural productivity across the continent. 20 yards in, you hit a rock. Not a huge boulder, but enough to send a jarring shock up through the handles into your already complaining shoulders. The plough judders, skips, and you have to muscle it back into line before it veers off into the hedgerow. Your son watches with wide eyes, probably filing away "Farming is hard" in his growing catalogue of life lessons. The quirky detail? Some farmers genuinely believed that ploughing by moonlight made crops grow better. Something about lunar influences on soil fertility. There's zero evidence this works, but it definitely made ploughing even more miserable, because now you're doing it in the dark while pretending the moon cares about your wheat yields. 50 yards now, your hands are already aching. The oxen maintain their steady pace, unbothered by your human fragility. Steady flicks an ear at a fly that doesn't exist. Bastard contemplates the meaning of existence. You concentrate on keeping the furrow straight, because crooked ploughing is not only inefficient, but also embarrassing when your neighbours see it. The morning sun is properly up now, still low enough to cast long shadows, but providing at least the illusion of warmth. Other farmers are in their fields too. You can see figures in the distance, hear the occasional shout of "Whoa!" or "Walk on!" carrying across the valley. Everyone's racing the weather, racing the season, racing time itself. 1 furrow down, 79 to go. Your back is already suggesting that this was a terrible idea, but the field doesn't care about your back. The field requires ploughing. So you turn the team, line up the next pass and begin again. By mid-morning, your shoulders are screaming and you've completed perhaps a quarter of the field. The oxen need rest. Even their bovine patience has limits. And honestly, so do you. You unhitch the team and lead them to the water trough, where they drink with the enthusiasm of marathon runners who've just discovered Gatorade. Your son has wandered off to throw rocks at a tree, his attention span for watching ploughing having expired approximately 90 minutes ago. While the oxen recover, you turn your attention to the hedgerow that borders the southern edge of your property. Hedgerows are the unsung heroes of English farming. Living fences that mark boundaries, contain livestock, provide windbreaks, and serve as habitat for the birds that eat your crop-destroying insects. They're also a massive pain to maintain, requiring annual trimming, gap filling, and the kind of diplomatic skills usually reserved for international peace negotiations. Your hedgerow is primarily hawthorn, which is perfect because hawthorn is basically nature's barbed wire. The thorns are vicious, long, sharp, and strategically placed to inflict maximum damage on anyone stupid enough to grab a branch without looking. Sheep won't push through it. Pigs think twice. Even deer generally decide to test someone else's boundaries. But hawthorn grows enthusiastically, and if you don't keep it trimmed, it becomes an impenetrable thicket that encroaches on your ploughing space and provides lovely homes for rabbits, who will then eat your vegetables with impunity. You fetch the billhook from the barn, a wicked curved blade on a wooden handle, designed specifically for hedge work. It's been in your family for 2 generations, the handle worn smooth by your father's hands and now yours. The blade needs sharpening, but when doesn't it? You make a mental note to visit the blacksmith soon, adding it to the endless list of tasks that exists permanently in your head. The technique for laying a hedge is part art, part violence. You cut partway through thick stems at an angle, then bend them down horizontally and weave them through upright stakes. Done correctly, you create a dense living barrier that actually gets stronger as the cut stems send up new growth. Done incorrectly, you've just killed a bunch of hawthorn and created gaps that your neighbour's sheep will exploit like tiny, wool-covered commandos. You begin trimming the excess growth, the billhook slicing through finger-thick branches with satisfying thunks. Small thorns catch on your sleeves, and you're reminded why you wear thick wool even though it's itchy. The alternative is arriving home looking like you fought a very angry cat and lost. Here's where rural life gets spicy. Property boundaries. See that stone marker half buried in the earth about 20 feet to your left? That's supposedly the boundary between your land and your neighbour Thomas's land. Thomas believes, with absolute conviction, that the marker has shifted over the years and is now 3 feet onto his property. You believe, with equal conviction, that Thomas is a lying weasel who wants to steal 3 feet of your hedgerow. This dispute has been ongoing for 5 years. Your fathers argued about it before you. Historians still argue whether these boundary disputes were genuinely about the land or just excuses for rural entertainment in an era without television. But either way, you and Thomas have achieved a Cold War state of mutually assured irritation. "Morning," comes a voice behind you. You don't need to turn around to know it's Thomas. The man has a sixth sense for appearing whenever you're working near the disputed boundary. "Thomas," you acknowledge, not pausing in your trimming. "That's my hedgerow you're cutting." "It's my hedgerow, as you well know, and we're not having this conversation again. The marker's been moved." "The marker hasn't moved since your grandfather's time, and if I recall, your grandfather was the one who moved it originally. This is your routine. It's almost comforting in its predictability." Thomas will huff. You'll continue working. He'll make vague threats about taking it to the manor court, and nothing will change because manor courts have approximately 8,000 of these disputes to deal with, and yours isn't even in the top 100 most interesting. "You're cutting into my land," Thomas insists, though he's already turning away. His heart isn't really in it today. Probably has his own hedgerow crisis to manage. "Am not," you reply, demonstrating the sophisticated rhetorical skills that have made you the talk of the village. The mainstream historical fact here is actually fascinating. Hedgerow disputes were such a constant feature of rural life that they generated an entire legal specialty. Hedge lawyers were informal arbitrators who'd examine boundaries, consult ancient maps, interview elderly villagers about where markers used to be, and generally try to prevent neighbours from bludgeoning each other with billhooks over 3 feet of hawthorn. You return to your work, cutting and bending, creating the interwoven pattern that will keep your livestock in and Thomas's opinions out. The physical labour is satisfying in a way that ploughing isn't. You can see immediate progress. Watch the unruly hedge transform into something purposeful and neat. Your son reappears, having exhausted the entertainment potential of rocks. "Why does Thomas always say that's his land?" he asks with the directness of children who haven't learned that some questions are better left unspoken. "Because Thomas is confused about basic geography," you reply. "Also, never trust a man whose chickens are skinny," says something about his judgment. This is unfair to Thomas, whose chickens are actually fine, but you're not above petty slander when it comes to property disputes. The quirky historical detail about hedgerows. Some villages had hedge inspectors who'd do an annual review to make sure everyone was maintaining their boundaries properly. Fail the inspection, and you'd be fined or forced to do extra work for the community. It was like a homeowners association, but with more hawthorn and fewer passive-aggressive notes about lawn height. You work your way down the boundary line, trimming, cutting, bending. Your hands are developing new blisters on top of old calluses, and a particularly aggressive thorn has drawn blood from your forearm despite the wool sleeve. The hedgerow is starting to look respectable, though, dense and uniform, a clear declaration that this land is yours and managed by someone who knows what they're doing. A rabbit bursts from the undergrowth near your feet, white tail flashing as it zigzags away toward the next field. Your son shouts and gives chase, which is adorable but futile. That rabbit is long gone, probably laughing in whatever language rabbits use to mock small children. The sun is properly high now, edging toward noon. Your stomach reminds you that breakfast was a long time ago and consisted primarily of oats and disappointment. but there's still another 20 yards of hedgerow to trim, and the oxen need to rest a bit longer before you can return to ploughing. So you keep working, the billhook rising and falling, the hawthorn, yielding to your determination one thorny branch at a time. The hedgerow work reminds you of something you've been avoiding. Your scythe is dull. Not slightly less sharp than ideal, dull, but actively dangerous because you're having to force it through grass, dull. A dull scythe is worse than no scythe at all, because at least with no scythe you're not expending enormous energy on a tool that's basically just beating vegetation into submission rather than cutting it. The blacksmith's forge is a half-mile walk through the village, which sounds like nothing until you remember you've already walked several miles today just doing farm work, and your back is staging a protest about the ploughing. But the scythe won't sharpen itself, and you've got haymaking coming up in a few months. So you collect the scythe from where it leans against the barn wall, hoist it over your shoulder like a particularly awkward staff, and begin the trek. Your son asks if he can come, using the tone of voice that suggests he's really asking, "Can I escape more farm work by pretending this is educational?" You agree because watching the blacksmith work actually is educational, and also because dragging a 7-year-old around means he's not at home getting into mischief that your wife will somehow blame on you. The village proper consists of maybe 40 cottages arranged along a central muddy track that optimistically calls itself a road. There's the church, stone and imposing, the only building that doesn't look like a strong wind could knock it over. There's the alehouse, which opens at noon and serves as the social hub for those with disposable income and flexible work schedules. There's the mill by the stream, currently grinding someone's grain into flour for a percentage fee. And there's the forge, distinguished by the black smoke rising from its chimney and the rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal that you can hear from 50 yards away. The blacksmith's name is John Wright, which is either a delightful coincidence or an indication that surnames based on occupations are becoming standardized. John is massive, not just tall, but broad in a way that suggests he's been swinging heavy hammers at resistant metal since before he could write his name. His arms are like tree trunks, his hands are scarred from countless small burns and cuts, and his leather apron is so stained and scorched it's probably achieved sentience. The forge itself is a stone building, open on one side to let smoke escape and let customers peer inside. The hearth burns hot enough to make the air shimmer, fed by bellows that John's apprentice, a skinny 15-year-old named Tom, operates with the dedication of someone who knows his master will wallop him if the fire temperature drops. "Need a sharpening?" John asks, not looking up from the horseshoe he's hammering into shape. The metal glows orange-red, and each strike sends sparks fountaining into the air like tiny fireworks. "Scythe, you." "Confirm," leaning it against the wall with the other tools waiting for attention. There's already a small crowd. 2 sickles, someone's broken ploughshare, and what looks like an attempt at a cooking pot that went horribly wrong. 2 pence, John says, which is the standard rate. "Be ready tomorrow." "Can't wait that long. Hedgerow work this afternoon." John grunts, which could mean anything from fine to you're irritating to the meaning of life eludes us all. He plunges the horseshoe into the water trough where it hisses and steams like an angry demon. Then he examines your scythe with the air of a physician diagnosing a patient. "You've been cutting through stones?" he asks. "No, just grass. And possibly some hidden rocks that jumped in the way." "Rocks don't jump. These ones did." Here's your mainstream historical fact. The village blacksmith was one of the most essential craftsmen in rural communities, second only to perhaps the miller. Everything metal, and farming requires a surprising amount of metal, either came from the blacksmith or needed the blacksmith's services to maintain. Ploughs, scythes, sickles, axes, hammers, hinges, nails, horseshoes, fire pokers, pothooks, and approximately 8,000 other items. Without a blacksmith, your entire farming operation would collapse within a season. John carries your scythe to his grinding wheel, a large circular stone that Tom immediately begins turning via a foot treadle. The wheel spins, and John applies the blade at precisely the correct angle, sending a shower of sparks cascading across the dirt floor. The sound is a distinctive grinding shriek that sets your teeth on edge but is somehow also satisfying, like the audio equivalent of a good stretch. Your son watches with enormous eyes, transfixed by the sparks. You're reminded that you were probably the same at his age. The forge is the most exciting place in the village if you're a child. It's got fire, dangerous tools, large men hitting things with hammers, and the faint but thrilling possibility that something might explode. Other villagers are gathering now. The forge serves as an informal meeting place, somewhere to exchange news, gossip, and wildly inaccurate weather predictions. Old William is here, a retired farmer who now spends his days wandering around offering unsolicited advice. Peter the shepherd has stopped by, probably to discuss the wolf rumour that's been circulating for 3 weeks, despite 0 actual wolf sightings. Heard about Thomas's dispute with you over the boundary, William announces, because apparently everyone knows everything in a village of 40 families. Thomas is confused, you reply diplomatically. Thomas's grandfather moved that marker in 52, William says with the authority of someone who was there. Everyone knows it. 3 feet onto your land it is. This is exactly the kind of vindication you needed. You make a mental note to reference William says the next time Thomas starts up, about the hedgerow. The quirky historical detail. Some blacksmiths genuinely believed that quenching hot metal in the urine of a red-haired boy would make it stronger. The theory was that red hair indicated excess heat in the body, so the urine carried special tempering properties. Did this work? Obviously not. Did it stop blacksmiths from keeping buckets of the stuff around? Historical records suggest it did not. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or just medieval-era hazing of apprentices. John finishes sharpening the scythe, tests the edge with his thumb, a practiced gesture that somehow doesn't result in bloodshed, and nods approval. That'll cut grass now. Try not to hit more jumping rocks. You pay your 2 pence, which represents about 4 hours of labour for you, but 30 minutes of John's time. The economics of specialisation mean that his skills are worth more per hour than yours, which seems unfair until you remember that John spent 7 years as an apprentice, learning to not set himself on fire while making horseshoes, so perhaps he's earned it. Wolves about, Peter announces to the assembled group, pivoting to his favourite topic. There haven't been wolves in this region for 50 years, William counters. Mrs. Fletcher's chickens got taken by something. That was a fox, you fool. Big fox. All foxes are big when they're stealing your chickens. This argument will continue for approximately 15 minutes, require no resolution, and provide entertainment for everyone present. It's the 18th century equivalent of a podcast, but with more shouting and less production value. You shoulder your newly sharpened scythe, collect your son, and prepare for the walk home. The morning is sliding toward midday, and there's still hedgerow work waiting, and after that the afternoon chores, and after that the evening feeding, and after that maybe, 15 minutes to sit by the fire before collapsing into bed. But your scythe is sharp now, which means you're equipped to face whatever vegetation dares stand in your way. Small victories matter when your entire life is measured in small victories. The walk back from the forge takes you past the widow Harrison's cottage, where she's outside beating a rug with the kind of violence that suggests the rug has personally offended her. She waves. You wave back, and this constitutes the entirety of your social interaction. Your son, energized by the blacksmith visit, chatters about whether he'll be a blacksmith when he grows up, which is adorable given that blacksmith apprenticeships cost money you don't have and require connections you definitely don't have. You'll be a farmer, you tell him, crushing his dreams with the efficiency born of realism. But blacksmithing looks fun. So does having money, but here we are. By the time you reach your cottage, the sun is nearly overhead, and your stomach is staging a full rebellion. You've been up for roughly 7 hours, burned several thousand calories on ploughing and hedgework, and consumed exactly 1 bowl of oat porridge. Your body is making its feelings known through a combination of hunger pangs and the kind of light-headedness that suggests your blood sugar is having opinions. The cottage smells like something that might charitably be called cooking. Your wife has the pottage pot suspended over the fire again, though this time it contains the remnants of yesterday's dinner, reheated into something approaching edibility. Pottage is the backbone of rural dining, a thick stew made from whatever vegetables, grains, and occasionally bits of meat happen to be available, cooked slowly into a consistency somewhere between soup and paste. Today's pottage appears to be primarily cabbage-based, with chunks of turnip, some wilted leeks, and the optimistic addition of a ham bone that's been boiled so many times it's basically a flavoured stick at this point. The bone goes back in the pot after every meal until it literally disintegrates, because wasting potential flavour is not an option when meat appears in your diet approximately once a week. Your wife ladles the pottage into bowls with a practiced efficiency of someone who's done this roughly 6,000 times. The children cluster around the table, and you notice your daughter has acquired a smudge of what looks like ash across her forehead. You don't ask. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The pottage is hot, vaguely savoury, and aggressively cabbage-flavoured. Cabbage is a winter vegetable champion. It stores well, grows enthusiastically, and contains enough nutrition to keep you from developing scurvy, which is really all you can ask from a vegetable. The problem is that by February you've been eating cabbage in various forms for 4 months straight, and your enthusiasm has waned significantly. Is there bread? You ask, knowing the answer but hoping for a miracle. Same as breakfast, your wife replies, producing the barley loaf that's now achieved a texture that could be used to repair masonry. You saw off a chunk with your knife. Everyone carries a knife, it's your primary eating utensil. Besides the spoon, and dip it into the pottage until it softens enough to chew without risking your teeth. Here comes the small beer again. Blessed small beer. The beverage that makes everything slightly more tolerable. You drink deeply, feeling the mild alcohol warmth spread through your chest. At roughly 2-3% alcohol, small beer is basically medieval Gatorade. Hydration plus calories plus just enough buzz to make you forget your back hurts. The mainstream historical fact, pottage was so central to English peasant diets that the phrase "to keep the pot boiling" entered the language, meaning to maintain basic subsistence. The pot genuinely never stopped. You just kept adding ingredients and water, sometimes for weeks at a time, creating what was essentially a perpetual stew that evolved with the seasons. Your son asks if he can have more, which is heartening because it suggests he's still growing and his appetite is healthy. Your wife gives him another ladle, scraping close to the bottom where the thicker, more substantial bits have settled. There's a hierarchy even in pottage distribution. The meatier chunks go to whoever is doing the heaviest labour, which today means you and your wife split the honour. The meal is consumed in relative silence, everyone too hungry and too tired to waste energy on conversation. The only sounds are spoons scraping wooden bowls, the fire crackling, and the baby making the indefinable noises that babies make when they're deciding whether to be content or unleash chaos. You're finished in maybe 10 minutes, bowl scraped clean because wasting food is literally wasting money. Your wife has already eaten while serving everyone else, a skill she's mastered that involves taking bites between ladles, nursing the baby, and probably mentally calculating the household accounts all simultaneously. Rest a bit, she suggests, which is less permission and more command. She knows that if you collapse later from exhaustion, she'll be the one dragging you inside and handling all the evening chores solo. The brief rest period is a legitimate part of the agricultural day. During summer, when the sun is brutal, the midday hours are actually the worst time to be working in the fields. Heat exhaustion is real, and you're more likely to make mistakes that can involve sharp implements and valuable livestock. So the tradition is to eat, rest briefly, and resume work when the worst heat has passed. You stretch out on the bench near the fire, not quite lying down but not exactly sitting either, achieving that perfect angle that takes pressure off your complaining lower back. Your son has disappeared somewhere, probably to torture insects or practice his rock throwing. Your daughter is helping her mother with some task involving the dairy corner. The baby has fallen asleep in the cradle, tiny fists clenched near its face. The quirky historical detail. Some farmers genuinely believed that sleeping immediately after eating would turn the food to poison in your stomach. The theory was that your body needed to be upright to properly digest, and lying down would cause the food to corrupt. This led to some truly uncomfortable rest positions as people tried to nap while remaining technically vertical. Your eyes drift closed. Just for a moment. Just a brief rest before returning to the hedgerow work, and then the afternoon feeding, and then checking the field drainage, and then the 17 other tasks that populate the endless list in your head. The cottage is warm. The fire pops and hisses. Your wife hums something tuneless while she works. Not a real song, just the absent sound of someone occupied with familiar tasks. Outside you can hear village sounds, someone's dog barking, the distant bleating of sheep, a cart creaking past on the muddy road. This moment, full stomach, warm fire, family nearby, brief respite from labour, this is actually pretty close to contentment. It won't last. The work will resume in 20 minutes. Your back will still hurt. The cabbage pottage will require consumption again tonight and tomorrow and the day after. But right now, in this suspended moment, things are fine. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial farmers were happier or more miserable than modern workers. whether the rhythm of agricultural life provided meaning or just ground people down into exhausted shadows. But right now, you're too tired to care about historical debates. You're just tired. Pleasantly, fully tired, and there's still half a day of work ahead. 20 minutes of rest is apparently all your body gets, because your wife announces, with the diplomatic grace of a drill sergeant, that the cheese needs turning, and could you please move the crate of turnips from the storage corner, because mice have been at them again. So much for contentment. But let's talk about something you're not doing right now but will absolutely be doing in a few months, and which fills you with a mixture of anticipation and dread every time you think about it. Haymaking. It's currently early spring, but come late July or early August, you'll be engaged in the most time-sensitive, weather-dependent, absolutely critical agricultural activity of the entire year. If you mess up ploughing, you can compensate. If you mess up haymaking, your animals starve come January. And then you starve because farms without livestock are basically elaborate vegetable gardens that can't plough themselves. Haymaking is deceptively simple in concept. Cut grass, dry it, store it. But the execution is where things get spicy, because you're essentially trying to preserve fresh grass in a climate that's determined to rot everything through a combination of rain, humidity, and sheer British dampness. You need at least 3 consecutive dry days, preferably 4 or 5, to properly cure hay, and England's weather in summer is about as reliable as a drunk rooster's sense of direction. The process begins with scything. And if you think ploughing is hard work, let me introduce you to the unique torture of scything 3 acres of meadow grass in the August heat. The scythe you just got sharpened at John's Forge will be your constant companion for roughly 2 weeks, and by the end, your shoulders will have their own independent grievances to file. The technique is specific. You stand with your feet wide, grip the scythe handles at the correct angle, and swing in a smooth arc from right to left, letting the blades curve and your body's rotation do the work. In theory, it's elegant. A rhythmic dance where you and the tool work as one, cutting grass in neat swathes that fall in perfect rows. In practice, you're hot, sweaty, covered in grass seeds, and every third swing catches on a hidden rock or thick stem that sends jarring vibrations up your arms. You start at dawn, because working midday in full sun while swinging a long blade is a recipe for heat stroke and or accidentally scything your own leg. The grass is still damp with dew, which actually makes cutting easier. The moisture weighs the stems down and gives the blade something to grip. You work methodically, creating rows maybe 3 feet apart, moving across the meadow in parallel lines that would satisfy any modern lawn care perfectionist. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Hay was so crucial to the agricultural economy that hay harvest was one of the few times when even wealthy landowners would join the fieldwork. It was all hands on deck. Men, women, children, anyone who could swing a scythe or turn hay with a rake. You literally couldn't afford to lose the crop because your pride prevented you from manual labour. By mid-morning you've cut maybe half an acre, and your shirt is plastered to your back with sweat. The cut grass lies in neat rows, already beginning to wilt in the sun, starting its transformation from green fodder to golden hay. This is where the anxiety really begins, because now you're in a race against weather, mould, and time itself. The grass needs to dry, but it can't dry too fast on top while staying wet underneath, or you get a lovely crop of hay that's crisp on the surface and rotting at the core. So every day, every single day, you and whoever you can press into service must turn the hay. You use wooden rakes to flip the rows, exposing the damp undersides to sun and air, then spreading it out to maximize drying surface area. Day 1, cut and leave in rows. Day 2, turn and spread. Day 3, turn again. Day 4, if you're lucky and the weather cooperates, the hay is dry enough to gather. If you're unlucky, you turn again and pray. The entire time, you're watching the sky with the intensity of a meteorologist, whose job depends on being right, because one unexpected rainstorm can ruin everything. Damp hay that gets baled and stored doesn't just rot, it can spontaneously combust. The bacterial activity in improperly dried hay generates heat, and in an enclosed barn, with plenty of dry fuel around it, you can literally burn down your winter food supply through the sin of impatience. Historians still argue whether more hay was lost to rain, or to farmers gambling on probably dry enough and losing, but the answer is probably both, frequently. Your quirky historical tidbit. Some farmers genuinely believed you could predict rain by watching how enthusiastically ants worked. Frantic ants supposedly meant incoming storms, So you'd see grown men crouching in fields, studying anthills, trying to decide whether to risk another day of drying or gather the hay immediately. Did ants actually predict weather? Probably not better than your aching joints did, but it gave you someone to blame when you guessed wrong. The gathering is its own skill set. Once the hay is properly dry, crisp to the touch, rustling rather than bending, smelling sweet rather than musty, you rake it into large piles called haycocks. These are temporary storage, conical mounds that shed rain if you build them correctly. Then comes the real work, loading the hay onto a cart and transporting it to your barn for long-term storage. A properly packed hay barn is a thing of beauty. The hay gets stacked carefully, leaving air channels for continued drying, building up layer by layer until you've got a golden mountain of compressed grass that smells like summer and represents survival. This hay will feed your cow, your oxen, your sheep, through the months when nothing grows, when the fields are frozen mud and the concept of fresh grass is a distant dream. The entire village helps with haymaking, trading labour in an ancient system of reciprocal obligation. Today you help Thomas, despite his boundary nonsense, because next week he'll help you. Cooperation isn't optional, it's survival. A single family can't harvest hay fast enough to beat the weather, but 6 families working together can accomplish in 2 days what would take one family 2 weeks. There's even a festive quality to it. Despite the brutal work, people bring food to share, small beer flows freely, children chase each other through cut fields, and young people flirt with the intensity of those who know they'll probably marry someone from within this exact 5-mile radius. It's exhausting, vital work, but it's also one of the few times when the community genuinely pulls together toward a common goal. You think about all this now, in spring, as you contemplate the coming season. The meadow where you'll cut hay is currently just awakening, green shoots pushing through winter dead grass. In 4 months, it'll be knee-high and ready for harvest. In 5 months, you'll be aching in entirely new ways and praying to a God you're not entirely sure is listening that the weather holds just one more day. But that's future, use problem. Present, you has mice in the turnips and cheese that needs turning, and a son who's just tracked mud across the floor. Your wife swept this morning. The wheel keeps turning. The seasons advance. The work never stops. The vegetable garden is technically your wife's domain, which is convenient terminology for you're still responsible when things go wrong, but you get no credit when things go right. It's located directly behind the cottage, maybe 40 feet square of intensively managed soil that produces more food value per square foot than your grain fields could dream of achieving. This is where the real magic happens, where kitchen scraps become compost, where careful seed saving becomes next year's crop, where your wife demonstrates a level of organizational competence that would put military logistics officers to shame. Right now, in early spring, the garden is transitioning from its winter sleep. The cabbage and leeks that sustained you through February are mostly harvested, leaving stalks that will get fed to the pigs. The soil is being turned, your wife and daughter working with hoes to break up compacted earth and mix in the winter's accumulated manure from the chicken coop. It's back-breaking work, but it's also hopeful work, because every turned shovel represents potential meals. Your wife has the seed collection stored in the cottage, small cloth bags labelled with contents in a handwriting better than yours, because she actually spent a year in dame school as a child, while you were busy learning to plough. Carrot seeds, pea seeds, bean seeds, onion sets, and the precious cabbage seeds that were saved from last year's best plants. Buying seeds at market is expensive. Saving your own seeds is free, but requires knowledge, patience, and the ability to resist eating every single vegetable when you're hungry in March. The carrot bed is her particular pride. Carrots are tricky, they need loose, stone-free soil to grow straight, and they take forever to germinate. She's already got the bed prepared, worked the soil to a fine texture, and sown the seeds in neat rows marked with small sticks. In about 2 weeks, tiny green shoots will appear, and then the real work begins. Weeding. Weeding is meditative if you're feeling generous, mind-numbing if you're being honest. Carrot seedlings look almost identical to several common weeds at first, so you need to know what you're looking for. Pull the wrong green shoot and you've just murdered a future carrot. Leave the weed, and it'll choke out 3 carrots while you're not paying attention. Your wife will spend cumulative hours on her hands and knees, carefully removing invaders, thinning the carrots so they have room to grow, probably contemplating the meaning of existence while her back screams protests. The pea situation is more immediately gratifying. Peas grow fast, climb enthusiastically up whatever support you provide, and produce pods within a couple of months. Your wife has constructed a trellis from hazel branches, woven together in a technique that's been passed down through generations of women who refuse to let good vegetables sprawl on the ground, where slugs could get them. The pea seeds go in now, poked into the soil with a stick roughly 6 inches apart. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The cottage garden was often worth more in food value than several acres of grain field. Grain feeds you, but gardens provide the vitamins, minerals and variety that prevent malnutrition. A family without a productive garden would suffer deficiency diseases even if they had plenty of bread. The garden was literally life-sustaining, but the garden is just one dimension of your wife's cottage economy management. There's also the small matter of ale brewing, which happens approximately every 10 days, and which transforms your cottage into a hot, multi-smelling operation that would probably violate several modern health codes. Ale is not beer, it's unhopped, made from malted barley, water, and yeast, and it goes off within about a week, which is why you brew constantly. The process starts with malted grain that you've either made yourself or bought from someone who specializes in malting. The grain gets mixed with hot water in a large vessel, steeped until the sugars extract. Then the liquid is drained off and yeast is added. Your wife manages this operation with the precision of a chemist, though she'd never use that word. Too hot and you kill the yeast. Too cold and nothing ferments. The wrong ratio of grain to water and you get either thin, disappointing ale or thick sludge that's trying to be beer but failing. She's got the process memorized through years of trial, error and drinking the mistakes. The quirky historical detail. Some women genuinely believed that menstruating would sour the ale, so they'd avoid brewing during certain times. This is nonsense from a biological perspective, but it definitely gave women a legitimate excuse to skip heavy labour periodically, so maybe the logic was more strategic than mystical. Historians still argue whether folk beliefs about women and brewing were genuine superstition or clever social negotiation disguised as tradition. The brewing barrel sits in the corner, currently bubbling away with this week's batch. The smell is simultaneously appealing and overwhelming, sweet, yeasty, with that particular fermentation funkiness that means the yeast is doing its job. Your daughter is supposed to be helping, but is currently distracted by the chickens that have wandered into the garden and are optimistically hoping for handouts. Get those chickens out before they scratch up the carrot bed, your wife commands, and your daughter scrambles into action. The chickens, sensing their plan has been discovered, make a tactical retreat toward the pig pen, where they'll undoubtedly cause different problems. Your wife wipes her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her temple. She's been up since before you were, has already milked the cow. Yes, she does it on days when you're busy with other work. Prepared breakfast, started the brewing, worked in the garden, and it's not even mid-afternoon yet. The term housewife suggests someone who sits indoors doing decorative needlework. The reality is a logistical manager running a complex operation that produces food, drink, clothing, and approximately 8,000 other necessities while simultaneously keeping tiny humans alive. She's now sorting through the onion sets, small bulbs that will be planted in rows to grow into full onions by summer. Onions are useful, they store well, add flavour to pottage, and can be eaten raw if you're desperate or particularly fond of aggressive breath. She's checking each set for rot or damage, discarding the questionable ones to the pig bucket. The leeks need harvesting, she mentions, which is less a statement of fact and more a delegation of responsibility. You make a mental note. After finishing the afternoon chores, pull the remaining leeks before they bolt and become inedible. The garden represents a parallel economy to your fieldwork. You grow grain for survival and sale. She grows vegetables for nutrition and variety. You manage large animals and equipment. She manages poultry, dairy, and the transformation of raw ingredients into consumable food. It's a partnership born of necessity, where both parties work approximately 14 hours a day and still barely manage to stay ahead of disaster. You sometimes wonder what she thinks about during those hours of weeding, stirring, preserving, mending, whether she dreams of a life with less labour, more comfort, actual leisure time. But you don't ask, because what would be the point? This is life. This is what survival looks like, and she's exceptionally good at it, which means you're both still alive and the children are growing, which is really the only success metric that matters. Your son has been assigned crow scaring duty, which sounds almost whimsical, until you remember that crows are intelligent, organised, and perfectly capable of destroying a newly seeded field if left to their own devices. He's currently stationed at the edge of the grain field you ploughed earlier, armed with a wooden clapper, 2 pieces of board connected by leather that make a sharp cracking sound when swung, and instructions to make noise whenever black wings appear on the horizon. He takes his job with the seriousness of a 7-year-old who's been told he's important, which means he'll be diligent for approximately 40 minutes before getting distracted by a beetle or a particularly interesting cloud formation. But 40 minutes of actual crow deterrence is better than nothing, and it frees you up to handle tasks that require opposable thumbs and the ability to follow multi-step instructions. Crow scaring is the entry-level position in the agricultural labour force. It requires minimal skill, can't really be done wrong enough to cause catastrophic damage, and teaches the fundamental lesson: farming is mostly standing around being uncomfortable while occasionally doing something loud. Your son will graduate from this to progressively more complex tasks: stone picking, weed pulling, water carrying, each one building the muscle memory and knowledge base he'll need to eventually manage his own 10 acres of unforgiving clay soil. Education, in the formal sense, is not part of his future. There's a dame school in the nearest market town 5 miles away where children of merchants and craftsmen learn to read, write, and do basic arithmetic. The cost is 2 pence per week, which sounds trivial until you remember that 2 pence is also the cost of getting your scythe sharpened, and you can't eat literacy. The calculation is brutal but simple. Reading won't help him plough a straighter furrow, so reading is an unaffordable luxury. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Literacy rates in rural England during the 18th century hovered around 30 to 40% for men and significantly lower for women, with massive regional variations. Cities were better. Villages like yours? You're doing well if 1 person in 5 can write their own name. The rest make their mark, an X or other symbol, on documents, and trust that whoever's witnessing it is being honest about what it says. Your daughter, currently helping her mother plant onion sets, will likely never learn to read at all. Girls might attend dame school if their families are prosperous and progressive, but for most rural girls, education means mastering the skills their mothers possess: dairy work, brewing, spinning, preserving, managing poultry, and the 1,000 small crafts that keep a household functioning. She's already more competent at cheesemaking than many adult men, which is the kind of education that actually matters when your survival depends on not letting milk spoil. The baby will join this labour force in a few years, probably starting with chicken feeding duties at age 4, graduating to simple weeding by 5. By 7, like your son, some kind of actual productive work. By 10, legitimate contributions to household survival. By 14, basically a small adult in terms of work capacity if not legal rights. There's a certain efficiency to this system. Children learn by doing, under supervision of people who actually know what they're doing, acquiring skills that are immediately applicable to their future lives. There's also a certain tragedy to it in that your son's entire life trajectory is essentially predetermined. He'll be a tenant farmer, working this exact land or land very much like it, marrying a girl from this village or the next one over, raising children who will do precisely the same thing. The possibility of becoming a blacksmith, a merchant, a scholar, or anything else requiring education or capital is roughly equal to his chances of becoming the King of France. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial rural society was characterized more by stability and security within a known role, or by suffocating lack of opportunity and social mobility. The answer is probably both, and it depended on whether you were currently comfortable or currently starving. Your son's voice rises in the distance. "Ah, get away!" accompanied by furious clapping. Either there are crows, or he's decided to make his own entertainment. You glance over and see a small flock indeed circling the field, and your son is waving his arms with genuine enthusiasm. Good lad, earning his keep. The quirky historical detail. Some farming families genuinely believed that teaching children too early would make them weak or spoil their character. The theory was that children needed to develop physical strength first, and book learning before age 10 would make them soft, prone to illness, and unsuited for real work. This was convenient reasoning for families who couldn't afford education anyway, but it had the patina of moral philosophy rather than economic necessity. Your wife calls to your daughter, showing her the correct depth for onion sets, shallow enough to get them started, deep enough that they won't dry out. The girl watches intently, then mimics the motion, poking holes with a stick and placing bulbs carefully. She'll plant maybe 100 onion sets this afternoon, and by doing so, she'll learn more about practical agriculture than most university scholars will ever know. There's no graduation ceremony from childhood to adulthood in your world. No diploma, no coming-of-age ritual beyond the gradual accumulation of competencies and the physical growth that makes you useful. Your son will transition from crow scaring to helping with harvest, from carrying water to carrying grain sacks, from watching the plough to guiding it. One day he'll wake up and realise he's doing a man's work, and that'll be that. Meanwhile, the crows continue their aerial reconnaissance, your son continues his enthusiastic defence of the grain field, and your daughter continues learning that if you plant onions incorrectly, you get no onions, which is the kind of immediate feedback that formal education rarely provides. The sun is shifting toward afternoon now, that particular angle that means you've got maybe 4 more hours of productive daylight. Your son will tire of crow duty soon, and you'll need to either take over or accept that some crows will get away with grand theft grain. Your daughter will finish the onion planting and move on to whatever task her mother assigns next. The baby will wake, demand attention, receive it, and then return to the universal infant activities of eating, sleeping, and creating laundry. This is education, repetition, observation, gradual mastery of tasks that will define your entire existence. No books required, no tests beyond survival, no grades, except you're still alive and the farm still functions. Your son's voice carries across the field again. I'm protecting the seeds. He is. In his own 7-year-old way, with his wooden clapper and his enthusiasm, he's protecting the seeds. And in doing so, he's learning to be you, which is both the most natural thing in the world and something that makes you occasionally melancholy in ways you don't quite have words to express. But the work continues. The crows don't care about your feelings, neither do the onions. Your sheep, all 12 of them, are currently grazing on the common land, that shared pasture where every tenant farmer's livestock mingles in a woolly democracy that occasionally breaks down into territorial disputes. Sheep are peculiar creatures, simultaneously timid and stubborn, capable of finding trouble in an empty field, prone to dying from causes that baffle even experienced shepherds. But they're also walking economic assets, producing lambs for meat, milk for cheese, manure for fields, and most importantly, wool. England runs on wool, not metaphorically, literally. Wool is the nation's primary export, the foundation of international trade, the reason Flemish merchants and Italian bankers pay attention to what happens on soggy British hillsides. The phrase, England's wool is her gold, isn't poetic exaggeration. It's economic reality. Fortunes are made in wool. Entire towns exist because of the wool trade. The wealthy merchant class that's emerging in cities, built on wool profits. Your share of this glorious economic miracle, approximately £3 per fleece if you're lucky, after the middlemen, the wool merchants, the exporters and the crown have all taken their cuts. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you have to actually shear the sheep, which is scheduled for late May or early June, when the weather is warm enough that the sheep won't immediately die from exposure, but before they start naturally shedding their fleeces and reducing their value. Sheep shearing is a community event, partly because it's skilled work that goes faster with multiple people, and partly because catching and holding down a panicked sheep while someone attacks it with shears requires more hands than any one family possesses. You'll help your neighbours shear their flocks, and they'll help you shear yours, in that ancient system of reciprocal labour that's kept rural communities functioning since approximately the Bronze Age. The shears themselves are specialised tools, large scissors essentially with blades maybe 8 inches long, connected by a curved spring mechanism that requires constant hand pressure to keep open. You don't own a pair because they're expensive and require maintenance you can't provide, so you borrow from Thomas. Yes, boundary dispute Thomas, because feuds don't override economic necessity, who inherited his grandfather's professional-grade shears. The process begins with catching the sheep, which is harder than it sounds because sheep possess a preternatural ability to sense your intentions and scatter, like they're being chased by wolves. You eventually corner one against the fence, a yearling ewe who's vocally protesting this violation of her rights, and wrestle her into position. Sheep are surprisingly heavy and surprisingly strong, and their definition of cooperation differs significantly from yours. Professional shearers can remove a fleece in maybe 3 to 5 minutes, in one continuous piece that unfolds like a woolly carpet. You're not a professional shearer. You're a farmer who shears sheep once a year, and spends the rest of the time trying to forget how difficult it is. Your technique is less graceful efficiency and more determined struggle, but eventually you do remove the fleece, only nicking the sheep's skin twice, which is actually a good day. Here's your mainstream historical fact. England produced approximately 100,000 sacks of wool annually in the 18th century, with each sack weighing about 364 pounds. That's over 18 million pounds of wool, and the export duties on it funded a significant portion of government operations. Your 12 sheep are contributing maybe £100 to this national total, which sounds insignificant until you remember there are thousands of small farmers like you, each adding their small contribution to England's wool dominance. The fleece once removed needs to be skirted, that is, the dirty stained edges trimmed away. The good wool in the middle is folded carefully and tied with twine, ready for sale. The skirted bits go into a separate pile for home use. Your wife will card and spin this lower quality wool into thread for making stockings, mittens, and probably another attempt at weaving cloth that will turn out slightly better than actively terrible. The sheep, now naked and indignant, gets released back to the flock where she'll immediately seek out companions to share her traumatic experience with. You move on to the next sheep, and the next, and the next, until
Spirit knew it was cared for. When the drying was complete, the skin was anointed with fragrant oils. Linen bandages, sometimes hundreds of meters long, were wrapped layer by layer. Amulets were placed within, a scarab for protection, an eye of Horus for health, a small figure of a god to guide the way. Each wrapping was accompanied by words. The mouth was touched in the opening of the mouth ceremony, so the deceased could breathe, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Finally, the mummy was placed in a coffin, sometimes one inside another like a set of protective shells. The outer coffins could be painted with gold, their surfaces covered with spells and images of gods welcoming the soul. When ready, the coffin was taken in a slow procession to the tomb. Family followed, carrying offerings of bread, beer, meat, and flowers. Musicians played, their soft notes carrying over the sand. In the tomb, the mummy was placed in the burial chamber. Around it were objects needed for eternity: furniture, clothing, food, tools, and even games. The tomb door was sealed, the offering rituals begun, and the soul's journey began. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not a sad farewell, but a careful sending. The dead did not vanish. They walked ahead into a place where fields were always green, the Nile always gentle, and the sun always rose. Books of the night, guiding the soul. The journey after death was long, and the road was not empty. There were gates to pass, waters to cross, guardians to face. Without guidance, a soul could lose its way. For this, Egypt created texts like the Book of the Dead, Amduat, and Book of Gates, manuals for the spirit. These were not books in the modern sense, but scrolls of papyrus or painted inscriptions on tomb walls, filled with spells, hymns, and illustrations. By lamplight, a scribe might copy them carefully, his reed pen dipping into black and red ink. Black for the body of the text, red for names of gods or headings. The lines curled like the Nile itself, leading the reader from one world to the next. Some spells were simple prayers. May I not hunger. May I not thirst. May I not be stopped at the gates. Others were precise instructions, telling the soul what words to speak to pass a guardian, or what gesture to make before a god. One of the most important moments was the weighing of the heart. In the hall of Ma'at, the deceased's heart was placed on a scale opposite the feather of truth. If the heart was light, free of lies and cruelty, the soul passed on to paradise. If heavy, it was devoured by Ammit, the fearsome eater of the dead. The texts reassured the reader. If the right words were known, the heart could be protected. A spell might say, "O my heart, do not stand against me as a witness. Do not oppose me before the keeper of the balance." The afterlife was not only trial, it was reward. Beyond the gates lay the field of reeds, a perfect version of Egypt, where the
agricultural calendar. Today is one of those days which means you're waking even earlier than usual because you've got a 10-mile walk ahead of you, carrying produce to sell and returning with goods you can't produce yourself. Your wife has been preparing for this for 3 days, calculating what can be spared, what needs to be sold, and what you absolutely must bring back or face her very specific brand of domestic disappointment. The sun hasn't even considered rising when you set out, carrying a pack basket loaded with 24 eggs, carefully wrapped in straw, a wheel of hard cheese, wrapped in cloth, 6 dressed chickens, yesterday's butchering, may they rest in peace, and a small crock of butter. Your wife wanted to send more butter, but you pointed out that you can't carry infinite weight over 10 miles, and she pointed out that you could if you tried harder. Marriage is a negotiation conducted through passive-aggressive commentary about load-bearing capacity. The walk to the market town is a well-trodden path. Literally, there's a track worn into the earth by centuries of farmers making this exact journey. You're not alone. Other figures emerge from cottages along the route, some carrying similar baskets, others leading livestock to sell, one optimistic soul attempting to transport a pig in a wheeled cart, while the pig audibly disagrees with every life choice that led to this moment. You fall into step with old William, who's decided that walking to market at age 70 is still a reasonable activity despite his knee's vocal protests. Nice morning, he offers, which is charitable given that it's dark, cold, and you're both trudging through mud. If you say so, you reply, adjusting the basket straps that are already cutting into your shoulders. The conversation for the next 10 miles will be sporadic and largely unnecessary. Comments about weather, speculation about market prices, updates on who's sick and who died and who's having a baby. It's companionable rather than meaningful, the verbal equivalent of walking in rhythm with someone so the journey feels less lonely. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Market towns were typically spaced about a day's walk apart, creating a network of commercial centres where rural producers could exchange goods. The 10-mile distance is standard, far enough to create distinct trading zones, close enough that farmers could walk there, conduct business, and return home in a single long day. Towns competed for market rights, granted by royal charter, because markets meant fees, tolls, and economic activity that could transform a village into something more prosperous. The sun rises properly as you're maybe 5 miles in, painting the countryside in shades of gold and amber that would be gorgeous if your shoulders weren't cramping and your feet weren't already developing blisters. Spring is definitely here. Hedgerows are budding, birds are making questionable life choices about nesting, locations, and the mud has achieved that perfect consistency where it's not frozen, but also not quite liquid, just aggressively clingy. You pass through 2 smaller villages, each one stirring to life as you walk through. Smoke rises from chimneys, dogs bark territorial warnings, a few early risers wave or nod, acknowledging your passage in that rural way that doesn't require actual conversation, but establishes that yes, you both exist and are pursuing separate activities in rough proximity. By the time you reach the market town, your legs are reminding you that you're not 20 anymore, and your basket feels like it's gained approximately 40 pounds through some kind of agricultural weight multiplication magic. The town is already bustling, farmers setting up stalls, merchants arranging goods, livestock creating a chorus of moos, bass, and indignant clucks. The market square is the economic heart of the region. Stalls line the perimeter, organised roughly by product type. There's the butter and cheese section, where women with sharp eyes and sharper business sense evaluate quality and negotiate prices. There's the livestock area, where men lead animals in circles while potential buyers assess muscle, teeth, and disposition. There's the dry goods section, with merchants selling salt, tools, cloth, and the occasional exotic item like sugar or tea that most people can only afford to look at. You head to the dairy section and begin your sales pitch, which consists mainly of displaying your goods and hoping people notice. Your cheese wheel attracts interest immediately. It's well made, properly aged, and you've got a reputation for consistency. A merchant's wife offers you 2 shillings for it, which is actually fair. You accept, trying not to look too eager, because showing desperation is a guaranteed way to get lowballed. The eggs sell quickly. Fresh eggs are always in demand. The chickens take longer because everyone's selling chickens. but eventually an innkeeper's wife buys all 6 for a reasonable price. The butter causes some negotiation, but you hold firm on your price and someone eventually pays it. By mid-morning, your basket is empty, and you've got a small pile of coins that represents months of cumulative work by you and your wife. Now comes the spending part, which is somehow both satisfying and depressing. Salt first, absolutely essential, impossible to produce yourself in inland England, and expensive enough that it's measured carefully. You buy £2, which will last maybe 6 months if you're careful with preservation. The cost makes you wince, but there's no alternative. Food without salt preservation is food that rots. Nails next. Iron nails are precious because iron is expensive and forging nails is skilled labour. You need them for repairs. The barn door is loose, the chicken coop has developed gaps, and there's always something requiring nails. You buy £2 of mixed sizes, already calculating which repairs are urgent and which can wait. The quirky historical detail. Some merchants genuinely believed that displaying goods in sunlight made them sell faster, because customers could see the quality better. This led to elaborate awning systems and strategic stall positioning, with premium spots commanding higher fees. Did sunlight actually increase sales? Probably, but mostly because customers could literally see what they were buying, rather than because of any mystical solar merchandising magic. You've got a few coins left, maybe 6pence after the essentials. This is where the luxury decision happens. Your wife specifically mentioned with calculated casualness that a ribbon would be nice, not necessary, just nice. For your daughter's hair, or maybe to brighten her own cap. The ribbon merchant has an array of colours: blues, greens, reds, yellows, each one a small splash of brightness in your aggressively brown existence. You choose a blue ribbon, medium quality, pretty but not extravagant. It costs 4pence, which is almost painful, but the mental image of your daughter's face when you present it makes the cost worthwhile. Historians still argue whether small luxuries like ribbons represented frivolous waste or essential psychological relief for people living extremely hard lives, but you're firmly in this psychological relief camp right now. The walk home is longer because you're tired and carrying salt, nails, and one precious ribbon. Old William has bought a new pipe and tobacco, and he's already smoking it despite the fact that tobacco costs more than your ribbon, and his lungs sound like a dying accordion. Worth it, he wheezes, and you don't argue. By the time you reach your cottage, the sun is setting and you've walked roughly 20 miles. Your wife takes inventory of your purchases, nods approval at the salt and nails, and actually smiles when you present the ribbon. Your daughter squeals with delight, holds it up to the fading light, and immediately ties it in her hair with the kind of pure joy that reminds you why you do this. Market day, 10 miles there, 10 miles back, your entire cash economy compressed into 6 hours of walking and negotiation. Worth it? Ask your daughter, currently twirling to make the ribbon flutter. August arrives with its particular brand of agricultural anxiety, because now everything you've worked towards since spring, the ploughing, the planting, the weeding, the praying, comes down to approximately 2 weeks of absolutely brutal labour in conditions that will test your physical limits and your faith in a benevolent universe. The wheat is ready, the barley is ready. Every farmer within 10 miles is staring at the same golden fields and the same uncertain sky, knowing that whoever gets their grain in first has the best chance of getting it in dry. The wheat stands maybe 4 feet tall, the heads heavy with grain, swaying in the breeze like a golden ocean that looks poetic until you remember you have to cut all of it by hand. Modern people genuinely don't understand the scale of hand harvesting grain. You're not trimming your lawn, you're cutting roughly 3 acres of wheat with a sickle, a curved blade about 16 inches long, while bent at the waist for 10 to 12 hours a day. Your back will hate you. Your hands will blister, heal, and blister again. And if it rains before you're done, all that grain rots in the field, and you get to experience the unique joy of potential starvation come February. The community labour exchange kicks in now, that ancient system where nobody keeps exact accounting, but everyone knows roughly who owes what to whom. You helped Thomas shear his sheep in May, despite the boundary dispute, which we're apparently never letting go of. So Thomas owes you harvest labour. You helped John the blacksmith bring in his hay in July, so John owes you. Your neighbour Peter helped you plough in April, so you owe Peter. It's a complex web of reciprocal obligation that would give accountants nightmares, but which rural communities have perfected over centuries. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Harvest labour was so critical that even strict social hierarchies could temporarily break down. Landowners might work alongside tenant farmers. Wealthy yeomen would bring their entire households, wives, children, servants, to help neighbours. The harvest had to come in, and status objections could wait until October, when everyone wasn't on the edge of collective disaster. You rise before dawn on harvest day 1, which is redundant because you always rise before dawn, but today feels different, more urgent. Your stomach is tight with anticipation and dread. The sky is clear now, but weather predictions in the 18th century are basically sophisticated, guessing based on observing clouds, wind direction, and how much your joints ache. Your joints are killing you, but that's baseline, so the forecast remains uncertain. By the time you reach your wheat field, there's already a crowd gathering. Thomas and his 2 sons, Peter with his wife and teenage daughter, John the blacksmith, who looks distinctly uncomfortable holding agricultural equipment, but who honours his obligations, old William, who probably shouldn't be here but insists he can still cut wheat despite being approximately 90% scar tissue and stubbornness. Even the vicar has shown up, which is either genuinely helpful or performatively pious, depending on your cynicism levels. Everyone's carrying sickles, the curved blades glinting in the early morning sun, looking vaguely medieval and slightly threatening. The technique is specific. You grab a handful of wheat stalks with your left hand, swing the sickle with your right to cut low on the stems, then deposit the cut grain in neat bundles that will later be tied into sheaves. Repeat approximately 8,000 times per acre. Try not to cut yourself or anyone else. Attempt to maintain a rhythm that's sustainable for hours. The work begins. You form a rough line across the field, each person taking a section, moving forward in parallel like some kind of agricultural military formation. The sound is surprisingly loud. The swish of sickles cutting through grain, the rustle of stalks falling, the occasional grunt of effort or curse when someone hits a particularly thick patch. Nobody's singing cheerful harvest songs like in pastoral paintings. Mostly people are concentrating on not severing fingers while maintaining pace. Your back begins complaining within the first hour. The bent-over position required for sickle work is unnatural and punishing, targeting precisely those lower back muscles that are already tired from every other farm activity you've done this year. You straighten periodically to ease the strain, and when you do, you can see the field slowly transforming from standing grain to cut swaths, but you can also see how much remains. So much remains. Orchestrated narrative continuation balancing community, hardship and temporal urgency. I need to continue with the harvest description, including the community dynamics, the physical toll, the race against weather, and ensure I hit my word count target while maintaining the narrative flow. The women follow behind the cutting crew, gathering the fallen grain and binding it into sheaves, bundles tied with twisted grain stalks themselves, an elegant bit of agricultural engineering that uses the crop to secure itself. Your wife is here, your daughter helping her, both of them working with practiced efficiency. The children too young for serious labour are assigned to gleaning, picking up any dropped grain heads, because wasting even a handful is unacceptable when winter hunger is a real possibility. By midday, you've maybe completed half an acre. Your hands are cramping around the sickle handle. Blisters have formed and popped and reformed. Your shirt is soaked through with sweat despite the fact that it's not even that hot. The physical exertion plus the bent position creates its own microclimate of misery. Someone's brought water and small beer, and you drink deeply during the brief rest, trying not to think about how much remains. The quirky historical detail, some farming communities genuinely believe that leaving a small portion of grain uncut would appease the corn spirit and ensure next year's harvest. This led to elaborate rituals around the last sheaf, which might be woven into decorative shapes or left standing in the field. Historians still argue whether this was genuine spiritual belief or just an excuse to have a festival after backbreaking labour, but the traditions persisted well into the modern era. Thomas works beside you for a stretch, both of you too tired for boundary disputes. Skies looking dark to the west, he mentions, between cuts, and you both glance toward the horizon where clouds are indeed gathering in an ominous fashion. We'll make it, you reply, with more confidence than you feel. The clouds might mean rain tonight, or rain in 3 days, or nothing at all, but they definitely mean anxiety. Every farmer in the field has seen rain destroy a harvest. Everyone's calculating whether to push harder now or pace for endurance. The afternoon stretches on, more of the field falls. The sheaves begin to pile up, standing in neat rows like tiny grain monuments. Your back has progressed beyond pain into a kind of numb acceptance. This is your life now. This is what you do. You cut wheat until it's done, or you physically can't continue. By evening, the first field is cut. Not gathered into the barn, that's tomorrow's problem, but cut and sheafed. You stand at the edge, leaning on your sickle like it's a walking stick, and survey the work. 3 acres transformed from standing grain to harvested crop in one long, brutal day. It's satisfying in a way that's hard to articulate, the tangible result of collective effort, the visible proof that you've advanced one step closer to winter security. Tomorrow, my field, Thomas announces, and there's general agreement. That's how the system works. Today everyone helped you. Tomorrow you help Thomas. The day after Peter's turn. On and on until everyone's grain is in, or until the rain comes and ruins everyone's day simultaneously. You limp home as the sun sets, every muscle announcing its displeasure. Your wife walks beside you, equally exhausted, the children trailing behind like a small tired parade. Tomorrow will be another dawn start, another day of this exact activity in someone else's field. And the day after, and the day after. But tonight your wheat is cut. Your contribution to England's grain supply is secured, and somewhere in your aching body is a small spark of satisfaction that almost makes the pain worthwhile. Almost. The wheat is cut and sheafed, standing in neat rows in the field like tiny grain teepees drying in the late summer sun. But cutting is only half the battle, arguably the easier half, because now comes threshing, which is essentially an extended exercise in beating plant matter with wooden sticks in a confined space while inhaling enough dust to replicate the experience of breathing in a sandstorm. It's agricultural glamour at its finest. The sheaves need to dry for a few days before threshing, otherwise the grain won't separate properly from the stalks. So you've got a brief window of maybe 3 days where you're not actively destroying your body, though you spend that time helping other farmers harvest their fields, so rest is a relative term. But eventually your wheat is dry enough, and it's time to move everything into the barn for the actual threshing. The barn becomes a workspace that would violate approximately 40 modern health and safety regulations. Sheaves are stacked along the walls, the centre floor area cleared for the actual threshing work. You've swept the floor as clean as possible, every grain matters, and losing seeds to cracks in the floorboards is waste you can't afford. The tools are simple, 2 flails and enough determination to power a small village. A flail is medieval technology that never got improved because it doesn't need improvement. It's 2 wooden pieces, a handle about 5 feet long and a shorter beating stick called a swipple, maybe 2 feet long, connected by a leather strap or chain that allows the swipple to swing freely. The physics are elegant. You swing the handle, the swipple follows with amplified force, and the impact separates grain from the stalk through percussion and intimidation. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Threshing was one of the few agricultural activities that was genuinely gender segregated in most regions. Men did the actual flailing. It requires significant upper body strength, and there's genuine danger of clubbing yourself or others if your technique falters. Women and children handled the follow-up work of winnowing and cleaning. This wasn't just tradition, it was pragmatic risk management for heavy, dangerous equipment. You and Thomas take the flails. Yes, you're working together again despite the boundary dispute, because harvest season transcends petty feuds. The technique is rhythmic. You stand across from each other, each taking an armload of wheat stalks and spreading them on the threshing floor. Then you swing in alternating rhythm. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The flails coming down on the grain heads with force that's satisfying when you're hitting correctly, and embarrassing when you misjudge, and the swipple wraps around the handle or worse, around your own leg. The sound is tremendous. Enclosed barn, wooden implements hitting dried plant material, the echo magnifying everything. It's like being inside a very aggressive drum performance where the drummer is angry and the drums are made of straw. Your arms begin aching within minutes, but the rhythm helps. Thwack, thwack, thwack. A pace you can maintain for hours if you don't think too hard about how many hours that might be. The dust is immediate and all-consuming. Every impact sends a cloud of chaff, broken straw bits, and grain dust into the air, creating a hazy atmosphere that would make modern OSHA inspectors weep. You're breathing it with every inhalation, coating your throat, getting in your eyes, settling on your clothes until you look like you've been dipped in a very fine grain-coloured powder. By the end of a threshing session, you'll be coughing up agricultural debris for days. But the method works. The grain heads shatter under the flail's impact, releasing the kernels from their husks. After several minutes of dedicated beating, you've got a pile of loose grain, chaff, the thin husks that enclosed each kernel, and broken straw all mixed together on the threshing floor. This mixture needs to be separated, which is where winnowing comes in, and where your wife and the women take over. Winnowing is ancient technology that relies on one simple principle: grain is heavier than chaff. Your wife takes a large flat basket and scoops up the threshed mixture. Then she tosses it into the air, letting it fall back into the basket while the barn door stands open behind her. The breeze, or sometimes just the motion of throwing, carries the lighter chaff away while the heavier grain falls back into the basket. It's elegant, requires no equipment beyond a basket and wind, and has been practiced basically unchanged since humans first domesticated grain. The quirky historical detail: some farmers genuinely believed that threshing during a full moon would yield more grain per sheaf. The lunar theory extended to basically all agricultural activities, with elaborate charts dictating optimal moon phases for threshing, winnowing, and storage. Did lunar phases affect grain yield? Obviously not, but it gave people a comforting sense that they could optimize something in a process that felt largely beyond their control. You continue the flailing while the women winnow, creating a production line of sorts. Your son has been assigned to gather the clean straw, the broken stalks left after threshing, and bundle it for use as animal bedding. Nothing gets wasted. The grain feeds humans, the chaff feeds livestock. The straw becomes bedding and eventual manure. It's a closed-loop system of agricultural efficiency that would impress modern sustainability consultants. Hours pass. Your arms transition from aching to numb to possibly falling off. The pile of clean grain grows slowly, golden kernels accumulating in large sacks that will be stored until needed. This wheat will become flour, which will become bread, which will keep you alive until next harvest. Looking at the growing pile, you can do mental math. Roughly 8 bushels per acre, 3 acres of wheat, so maybe 24 bushels total. Each bushel is about 60 pounds, so you're looking at maybe 100 or 400 pounds of wheat. Sounds impressive until you remember that's feeding a family of 5 for a year, plus seed wheat for replanting, plus payment to the mill for grinding, plus any sales to raise cash. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial agricultural yields were shockingly low or reasonably efficient given the technology and land quality available. The answer depends on whether you're comparing to modern industrial farming, in which case yes, they're terrible, or to what's possible with hand tools, no fertilizer beyond manure, and unpredictable weather, in which case they're actually pretty decent. Thomas pauses to wipe dust from his face, leaving clean streaks through the coating of agricultural debris. Your wheat looks good this year, he admits, which from Thomas is practically a declaration of love. Yours wasn't bad either, you concede, because harvest solidarity temporarily overwrites boundary disputes. The afternoon light slants through the barn door, illuminating the dust clouds swirling in the air like some kind of agricultural aurora. Your daughter is helping winnow now, learning the wrist motion required to toss grain at just the right angle. She's not very good at it yet. Half her tosses result in grain flying everywhere. But she's learning, and that's what matters. By evening, you've threshed maybe half the harvest. The rest will require tomorrow's work and the day after that. It's monotonous, dusty, physically demanding labour that would bore modern people to tears within 15 minutes. But there's also something almost meditative about it. The rhythm of the flails, the gradual accumulation of grain, the visible progress toward winter security. You'll sleep deeply tonight, dreamlessly, your body too exhausted for anything else, and tomorrow you'll wake and do it again. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of survival, performed in a dusty barn by people whose entire existence depends on successfully separating grain from stalks using wooden sticks and determination. It's not glamorous, but it works. And that's really all you can ask for. October brings the sobering reality that every piece of food you've produced this year needs to somehow survive until next spring without rotting, spoiling, or being eaten by the vermin who view your storage areas as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Food preservation isn't a hobby or an interesting historical craft project. It's the difference between eating in February and starving in February. No pressure. The pig has been selected for slaughter. You've been fattening him since spring, feeding him kitchen scraps and whey and anything else that wasn't fit for human consumption, watching him balloon into roughly 200 pounds of potential pork. Now comes the moment where you convert a living animal into winter protein, which is emotionally easier than it sounds because you never named him, and also because you're really, really motivated by not starving. The actual butchering happens on a cold morning. Temperature matters because you need the meat to chill quickly before bacteria can establish residence. You don't do this alone. Your neighbour Peter helps, because butchering a pig requires multiple people, and also because you'll help him with his pig next week. The process is swift, practiced, and not particularly pleasant to describe in detail, but within an hour you've gone from pig to carcass hanging in your barn ready for processing. Here comes the salt. Remember that expensive salt you bought at market? This is why. You've got maybe 20 pounds of salt total, and you're about to use half of it preserving this pig, because salted pork is one of the few ways to keep meat edible for months without refrigeration. The technique is straightforward. Pack meat in salt, let it cure for several weeks, then store in a cool, dry place and hope for the best. You butcher the pig into manageable pieces, hams, shoulders, bacon sides, various other cuts that have names you know, but modern people don't. Each piece gets rubbed thoroughly with salt, the crystals working into every surface, drawing moisture out through osmosis while creating an environment where most bacteria can't survive. It's food science before anyone called it food science, perfected through centuries of trial and error and probably a fair number of people dying from poorly preserved meat. The salted pork goes into a large barrel in the coolest corner of your cottage, packed in layers with more salt between each layer. In a few weeks you'll have salt pork, tough, chewy, intensely salty, and absolutely vital to winter survival. Before cooking you'll need to soak it in water to remove excess salt, and even then it'll be more preserved protein than delicious meal. But delicious is optional when the alternative is malnutrition. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Salt consumption in preservation was enormous. The average rural household might use £50–100 annually just for food preservation, not including salt used in cooking. This is why salt taxes were so controversial, and why salt smuggling was a legitimate career path for desperate people. Control the salt supply and you control food security, which is why governments historically monopolise salt production and trade. But pork is just the beginning. Your wife is simultaneously managing the vegetable preservation campaign, which involves different techniques for different foods. The cabbage harvest is being converted into sauerkraut, a German technique that's become popular in England because it works remarkably well. Cabbage gets shredded, salted, there's that salt again, packed tightly into crocks and left to ferment. The fermentation creates an acidic environment that preserves the cabbage for months, while also, conveniently, making it easier to digest and somewhat less aggressively cabbage-flavoured. The smell during fermentation is distinctive. A sour, funky aroma that permeates the cottage and makes visitors wonder if something died in your kitchen. But in 3 months, when fresh vegetables are a distant memory, you'll be grateful for sauerkraut, even if it smells like a German beer hall's floor after a particularly enthusiastic evening. Apples present a different challenge. You've got maybe 6 bushels from the small orchard you share with 3 neighbours, and apples don't preserve like vegetables. They're living things that continue to ripen and eventually rot. So storage is more about slowing decay than preventing it. The technique involves careful selection. Only perfect apples get stored. Any bruised or damaged ones get eaten immediately or made into cider. The good apples go into the root cellar, arranged on shelves so they don't touch, inspected weekly for signs of rot. The root cellar is a partially underground storage area that stays cool but not freezing, dark but not damp, achieving a delicate balance that keeps some foods viable through winter. Your turnips, carrots, and beets are down there too, packed in sand or straw to prevent moisture loss. Onions hang in braids from the rafters. Dried beans occupy cloth sacks. It's an organised system of controlled decay management. The quirky historical detail. Some families genuinely believed that storing apples near potatoes would make both foods spoil faster, while others believed the combination prevented sprouting. The theories contradicted each other, but everyone had strong opinions. Modern science suggests apples do produce ethylene gas that can affect other produce, so the believers in separation were accidentally correct, but for reasons they didn't understand. Your wife is also drying herbs, bundles of thyme, sage and rosemary hanging from the ceiling beams, slowly desiccating into preserved seasonings. Mushrooms get threaded on strings and dried near the fire. Some vegetables get pickled in vinegar solutions, Another expensive preservation medium but effective. Every preservation method has its trade-offs. Salt is expensive, vinegar is expensive, drying requires constant attention, fermentation can go wrong spectacularly. The anxiety underlying all this preservation work is palpable. You're literally gambling on your ability to correctly preserve enough food to last 5 or 6 months. Mess up the salt ratios and the pork spoils, fail to properly ferment the cabbage and it rots. Store apples wrong and you lose the whole batch. There's no backup plan, there's no grocery store. If your preservation efforts fail, you eat less. And if you eat less in winter, you might not have the strength for spring ploughing. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial food preservation was remarkably sophisticated or desperately inadequate, whether rural families generally succeeded or generally struggled. The answer is probably both, with significant regional and year-to-year variation, which is the historical equivalent of shrugging while looking concerned. By late October, your cottage is essentially a preservation warehouse. Barrels of salt pork, crocks of sauerkraut, shelves of stored apples, braided onions, dried beans, smoked bacon hanging from rafters, cheese wheels aging in the dairy corner, sacks of grain. It looks abundant, almost prosperous, until you do the math and realize this needs to feed 5 people for 6 months, and suddenly it looks barely adequate. You make a mental inventory, probably enough, maybe enough, should be enough if nothing unexpected happens. That, if nothing unexpected happens, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Because unexpected things happen constantly. Illness, accidents, unusually harsh weather, livestock dying, vermin getting into stores. But right now, in this moment, looking at your preservation efforts, you feel that cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, you've done enough. The work of summer has been converted into winter security. The labour of growing has been transformed into the labour of keeping. And if you're lucky, if the preservation works, if nothing spoils, if the winter isn't too harsh, you'll make it to spring when the cycle begins again. The day's main labour ends when the sun sets, but that doesn't mean you get to collapse immediately into your straw mattress and embrace unconsciousness. There's still the evening routine, feeding animals one last time, checking that everything's secured against nocturnal predators, making sure the fire won't burn down the cottage or die completely. And then, once those basics are handled, there's the endless maintenance work that keeps your operation from literally falling apart. You settle onto the bench near the hearth, your aching body grateful for something approximating rest, even if your hands won't actually stop working. Tonight's project is harness repair. The ox yoke's leather strapping has developed a concerning crack that will become a complete failure if left unattended. Leatherwork by firelight is traditionally done in winter, when there's more evening time and less exhaustion. But harnesses don't care about your schedule. They break when they break and you fix them or you don't plough. Your wife sits across from you, a basket of mending at her feet, that appears to reproduce asexually, because it never gets smaller no matter how many hours she devotes to it. Tonight she's darning socks, threading a needle with wool yarn and weaving it across the holes that appear in footwear with depressing regularity. Socks are expensive if you buy them, time-consuming if you knit them, and essential for preventing frostbite so they get darned and redarned until they're more patched than original sock. The light comes from tallow candles, rendered animal fat moulded around a wick, producing illumination that's better than darkness but not by much. Tallow candles smoke, smell like rendered fat, because they are rendered fat, and produce a flickering yellow light that's adequate for basic tasks but terrible for anything requiring precision. A single candle might last 3 to 4 hours and costs maybe a penny, which sounds cheap until you remember that winter evenings are 14 hours long and you're trying to see what you're doing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most rural families went through enormous quantities of candles. Estimates suggest maybe 100 to 200 pounds of tallow annually for lighting and some cooking purposes. This required rendering fat from butchered animals, a process that's exactly as aromatic and time-consuming as it sounds. Wealthier families used beeswax candles, which smell nice and burn cleaner, but beeswax costs roughly 10 times more than tallow, so that's not happening in your cottage. Your son has been given the task of whittling wooden pegs, small dowels used for approximately 8,000 repairs and construction purposes around the farm. He's working with a small knife, shaving a chunk of willow wood into a tapered cylinder, producing more wood shavings than actual pegs, but learning the skill. The knife is sharp enough to be genuinely dangerous, and you keep one eye on him while working on the harness, ready to intervene if he starts bleeding. The harness leather is stiff and resistant, requiring an awl to punch holes before you can sew the repair patch in place. You've got some spare leather from last year's butchering, smaller pieces that weren't good enough for making new harness but are perfect for patches. The technique is straightforward. Cut a patch, position it over the damaged area, punch holes, thread leather cord through the holes, pull tight. Your hands know the motions, even if your eyes are struggling in the dim light. Your daughter is carding wool, using 2 wooden paddles studded with bent wire teeth to align wool fibers before spinning. It's repetitive work, suitable for someone her age, producing neat rolls of prepared wool that her mother will eventually spin into thread. The sound is a soft scratching, wool fibers being dragged through wire teeth that blends with the fire's crackle and your son's whittling scrapes. The baby is mercifully asleep in the cradle, which means you might get 30 uninterrupted minutes before the next wake-up feeding and general chaos eruption. Nighttime with an infant is essentially interval training in sleep deprivation, and you've learned to appreciate these brief, peaceful interludes. The quirky historical detail. Some families genuinely believed that mending clothes on Friday would cause the repaired item to develop more holes faster. Friday was considered unlucky for beginning any new work, including repairs, with complex theological and folkloric justifications. Did mending on Friday actually cause more damage? Obviously not. But it gave people a socially acceptable reason to postpone work for a day, which might have been the real point. Your wife holds up a sock she's been darning, examines it critically in the candlelight, and sighs. This is more darn than sock at this point. But she adds it to the completed pile anyway, because even more darn than sock is better than no sock. New sock's next market trip, you suggest, knowing the answer but trying to be helpful. If we sell enough eggs, and the price is reasonable and nothing unexpected needs buying and the children don't outgrow their shoes, she lists, which is the rural household equivalent of probably not. The evening work is companionable, everyone occupied with their tasks, the cottage filling with the soft sounds of maintenance and repair. This is family time, technically, though nobody's playing games or having deep conversations. You're just existing in proximity while working, which is the pre-industrial version of quality time. Your son has produced something approximating a peg, though it's more vaguely peg-shaped than actually functional. You examine it, offer some constructive criticism about achieving more consistent taper, and add it to the maybe-usable pile. He beams with pride anyway, because he's 7 and accomplished a thing. Historians still argue whether these evening work sessions represented oppressive labour conditions where even leisure time was colonised by economic necessity, or whether they represented a more integrated approach to work and family life that modern society has lost. The answer probably depends on whether you're doing it voluntarily as a nostalgic hobby, or because your family's winter survival depends on getting this sock darned. The candle burns lower, the tallow melting into the holder, the flame guttering slightly when drafts sneak through wool cracks. You've maybe got another hour before the candle dies and darkness forces you to bed. That's enough time to finish the harness repair and maybe start on the loose chicken coop board that's been on your mental list for 3 weeks. Your wife starts on another sock, this one with a heel hole that looks like a small animal tried to escape through it. Your daughter continues carding wool, creating a small pile of prepared fibre. Your son whittles another peg with slightly better results. The baby sleeps. Outside, the village is dark and quiet. No streetlights, no traffic. Just the occasional dog bark or owl call. The darkness is complete in a way modern people never experience. No ambient light pollution, no glowing signs, just absolute blackness beyond your cottage walls. But inside, by candlelight, your small family continues its maintenance work. Fixing, mending, repairing, whittling. Keeping the farm functional one patched harness and darn sock at a time. It's not dramatic, it's not exciting. It's just the evening work performed by people too tired to do it but too sensible not to. The fire pops. The candle flickers. Your hands keep working. Tomorrow brings more labour, more challenges, more things that will break and need fixing. But tonight the harness gets repaired, and that's enough. Sunday arrives with its own particular obligations, distinct from the other 6 days primarily because you're expected to stop working, and instead sit still for several hours while the vicar explains why you're probably going to hell. The concept of a day of rest sounds lovely until you remember that your animals don't observe the Sabbath and still need feeding. But religious authorities have made it clear that excessive work on Sundays is both sinful and observable. So you do the minimum necessary and then get dressed for church. Dressed for church is relative. You own exactly 2 sets of clothing, work clothes and slightly less terrible clothes. The slightly less terrible outfit comes out on Sundays, market days and funerals. It's the same basic components as your everyday wear, but cleaner, less patched, and reserved for occasions where people will be looking at you judgmentally. Your wife has spent time this week making sure everyone's Sunday clothes are brushed, mended, and don't smell aggressively of barn. The church bell begins ringing at 9 o'clock, which is your signal to start the half-mile walk to the parish church. This isn't optional. The parish legally requires attendance, and the church wardens keep records. Miss too many Sundays and you'll be fined, publicly noted as a recusant, and subjected to the kind of social pressure that makes life in a small village genuinely uncomfortable. So you go, even though you'd rather be doing approximately 8,000 other things. The church is the largest building in the village, stone construction, hundreds of years old, cold as a tomb and about as cheerful. The interior smells like damp stone, old wood, and the accumulated prayers of centuries. The wealthy families have box pews near the front with cushions and privacy. You get the hard wooden benches in the back, where you can't really see the vicar, but you can definitely hear him, and he can definitely see if you're sleeping. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Church attendance in 18th century England was essentially mandatory, with the Anglican Church serving as both religious institution and social control mechanism. Parish records documented births, marriages, deaths, and attendance. The church wasn't just spiritual authority, it was the government's local representative, collecting tithes, maintaining records, and ensuring conformity to national religious policy. The service begins with hymns, the congregation singing in that particular way that suggests musical enthusiasm overcomes musical ability. You don't know all the words, but you know enough to mouth along convincingly. Your son is fidgeting within 30 seconds, receiving a sharp look from your wife that promises consequences if he doesn't settle down. The vicar launches into his sermon, which today appears to be about pride being a sin. He's particularly animated, gesturing emphatically, his voice rising and falling with practiced dramatic effect. The message is clear. You should be humble, accept your station in life, and stop wanting things you don't have. It's convenient theology for maintaining social hierarchy, and you notice the wealthy landowners in the front pews nodding approvingly, while you in the back are being told to embrace poverty as spiritually purifying. But honestly, the sermon is secondary to the real purpose of Sunday church: social interaction. This is the one time each week when the entire village gathers in one place. Information gets exchanged, alliances are formed, gossip is weaponized, and social standing is negotiated through elaborate rituals of who sits where and who greets whom first. During the brief pause between sermon and communion, you manage to exchange meaningful glances with Thomas, who apparently also thinks the vicar's going on a bit long. Peter is sitting with his family 3 rows ahead, and you catch his eye when he turns to cough. Old William is actively sleeping, head tilted back, mouth open, somehow getting away with it because he's elderly and the church wardens have given up on him. The quirky historical detail. Some parishes genuinely employed sluggards or nappers, officials, whose job was to walk around during services with long sticks and poke anyone who fell asleep. The theory was that sleeping during sermons showed disrespect to God. The reality was that most attendees had been up since before dawn doing manual labour, and the church was the warmest place they'd been all week, making sleep practically inevitable. After the service ends, after what feels like 17 hours but is actually 90 minutes, the congregation spills out into the churchyard, and this is where the real action happens. The women cluster in groups, sharing news that ranges from genuinely important, Martha's baby came early, to scandalously trivial, did you see what Elizabeth was wearing? The men gather separately, discussing crops, livestock, weather predictions, and the ongoing boundary dispute between you and Thomas, which apparently is now public entertainment. Heard the mark has been there since before your grandfather's time, one neighbour mentions helpfully, taking your side. Heard Thomas's grandfather moved it in 52, another adds, which is exactly what old William said, so now it's basically confirmed village history. Thomas, standing within earshot, looks like he wants to argue but is constrained by the fact that we're in a churchyard, and getting into a shouting match about property boundaries immediately after a sermon about pride would be poor optics. The vicar makes his rounds, greeting parishioners with the kind of forced cheerfulness that suggests he'd rather be anywhere else. He stops by you briefly, asks about your family, accepts your compliments on his sermon with practiced humility, and moves on to the next person. These interactions are ritualized. Everyone knows their lines, everyone performs their role, and genuine connection is neither expected nor really possible given the power dynamics. Your daughter has found other girls her age, and they're engaged in some kind of game involving a stick and rules that make no sense to adults. Your son is with a pack of boys who are probably discussing either insects or weapons, because that's the scope of 7-year-old boy conversation. The baby is being passed around between women who coo over it with the universal language of adults confronting small humans. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial church attendance represented genuine religious devotion or social obligation enforced through community pressure. The answer is probably both, with significant individual variation that records don't capture. Some people were genuinely devout. Others were there because missing church meant social death and possible fines. You learn during these post-service conversations that the widow Harrison is ill again, that John the blacksmith's daughter is getting married in spring, that someone saw a fox near the chicken coops, and that wheat prices are expected to rise, which is good news if you have wheat to sell, and bad news if you need to buy grain. This information exchange is valuable. It's the village news network, operating through gossip and strategic information sharing. Eventually the crowd disperses. You collect your children, nod farewell to neighbours, and begin the walk home. The afternoon stretches ahead. Technically a day of rest, though the animals still need tending and there's always something requiring attention. But at least the social obligation is fulfilled. You've been seen, counted, and confirmed as a participating member of the parish. The bell tower recedes behind you as you walk. Next week you'll do this again. Same church, same sermon themes, same social dynamics played out with minor variations. It's predictable, ritualized, and as much a part of the weekly rhythm as ploughing or milking. And honestly, after 6 days of back-breaking labour, sitting still for 90 minutes while someone talks at you is almost restful. Almost. Your son develops a fever in late November, which transforms your cottage from home to anxiety chamber faster than you can say, "Please don't die." He's burning up, complaining his throat hurts, refusing food, and generally exhibiting symptoms that could mean anything from minor cold that will pass in 3 days to something that will kill him by Friday. The problem is you have no way of knowing which, because medical diagnosis in the 18th century is essentially sophisticated guessing mixed with prayer and folk wisdom of dubious validity. The nearest physician lives in the market town 10 miles away and charges fees that would consume roughly 6 months of your income for a house call. So physicians are for wealthy people with complicated ailments, not for tenant farmers whose children get fevers. You're operating on a combination of traditional remedies, things your mother taught you, and desperate hope that the human body's natural healing processes will overcome whatever's attacking it. Your wife immediately shifts into crisis management mode. The first intervention is herbal. She prepares a tea from dried elderflower, which is supposed to reduce fever and promote sweating to expel bad humours. The medical theory is questionable. Humoral medicine is starting to lose credibility among educated physicians, but it's still the dominant framework in rural areas. The practical effect is that elderflower tea is mildly soothing, and at minimum it gets fluids into a feverish child, which is genuinely helpful. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Infant and child mortality in 18th century England was approximately 25 to 30%, meaning roughly 1 in 4 children died before age 5. Fever, diarrhea, respiratory infections, and various other ailments that modern antibiotics treat easily were genuine death sentences. Parents lived with the constant grinding fear that any illness could be the one that takes their child, and that fear was statistically justified. You try to keep the boy comfortable, which means piling blankets on him to sweat out the fever, a technique that's probably counterproductive but which everyone believes in. He's miserable, alternating between chills and sweating, occasionally crying, mostly just lying listlessly while you and your wife exchange worried glances that communicate entire conversations without words. The wound treatment knowledge you possess is slightly more evidence-based, mostly because wounds provide immediate feedback about what works. You know that cleaning wounds with boiled water helps prevent infection, Though you don't know about germ theory, you just know that dirty wounds go bad more often than clean ones. You know that cobwebs, when pressed onto a bleeding cut, help stop blood flow. This actually works because spider silk contains vitamin K and other compounds that promote clotting, though you think it works because of the spider's natural binding properties. Your wife swears by bread mold for infected wounds, applying mouldy bread directly to cuts that are showing signs of rot. This is accidentally brilliant. She's essentially discovered penicillin about 150 years early, though she thinks it works because the mold draws out the poison. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial folk medicine was sophisticated traditional knowledge or lucky accidents that sometimes worked, but the answer is probably both, with no clear way to distinguish them at the time. The truly questionable remedies come out when you're desperate. There's a village woman, Old Meg, who's considered wise in healing matters, though her methods are a fascinating blend of possibly helpful and definitely nonsense. She suggests applying a poultice of onions and goose grease to the boy's chest to draw out the fever. The goose grease provides some moisture and the onions smell terrible, which might clear sinuses through sheer aggressive aromatics, but the theoretical framework is complete fantasy. She also suggests hanging a bag of herbs around his neck, feverfew and rue and some other plants she won't name because knowledge is power and power is secret. Whether this does anything beyond making the child smell like a garden is debatable, but you're desperate enough to try it. Desperation makes people receptive to solutions that wouldn't pass even basic scrutiny under calmer circumstances. The quirky historical detail. Some healers genuinely believed that transference could cure illness. They'd rub the sick person with a piece of meat, then bury the meat, theoretically transferring the sickness into the ground where it would rot away with the meat. This is nonsense from a medical perspective, but it provided psychological comfort and gave people a sense of agency when facing terrifying illness. You don't sleep much over the next 3 nights. Your son tosses and turns, occasionally calling out in fevered delirium, and you sit beside him feeling helpless and terrified in equal measure. Your wife prays, genuinely prays, not the rote Sunday church performance, but actual, desperate bargaining with God. You find yourself joining her despite your usual skepticism, because what else can you do? And then, miraculously, frustratingly, inexplicably, the fever breaks. On the 4th morning, his skin is cooler. He asks for water, then porridge, then complains he's bored, which is the most beautiful complaint you've ever heard. He's going to live. The illness, whatever it was, has passed. Whether it was the elderflower tea, the onion poultice, the prayers, or just his body's natural defences, you'll never know. But he's recovering, and that's what matters. The injury that happens 2 weeks later is different. You slice your hand open while repairing the barn door, a deep cut across your palm that bleeds enthusiastically and immediately. This you understand. Clean the wound with boiled water, press cobwebs on it to stop bleeding, bind it tightly with clean cloth, and hope infection doesn't set in. For the next week you watch it obsessively for the telltale red streaks that mean blood poisoning, which means death, which means your family loses its primary labourer and probably the farm. The cut heals cleanly, leaving a scar that joins the collection already decorating your hands. Every farmer has these scars, maps of near misses, reminders that you're always one infection away from disaster. You're lucky this time. You've been lucky many times, but you know people who weren't lucky, who died from wounds that started as minor cuts, or from fevers that wouldn't break, or from childbirth complications, or from any of the 1,000 casual ways that life in the 18th century can kill you. You learn to live with this constant low-level terror. You treat illnesses with whatever remedies you possess, pray to whatever gods might be listening, and accept that ultimately you have very little control. Medicine is for the wealthy. For you, there's folk remedies, hope, and the stubborn resilience of human bodies that sometimes, against considerable odds, manage to heal themselves. Your son is back to scaring crows within a week. The crisis has passed. Until the next one, there's always a next one. January settles over the countryside like a cold, wet blanket made of malice and frozen mud. The ground is hard enough to wring when you hit it with a shovel, which you discover while attempting to dig out a drainage ditch that's been on your mental list since October. After 5 minutes of futile chipping at soil that's achieved the consistency of stone, you give up and accept the reality. Winter field work is essentially impossible. which means you're entering the season of enforced idleness that's somehow more exhausting than actual labour. The daily routine shrinks dramatically. You still wake before dawn. Your body doesn't understand the concept of sleeping in, but now there's maybe 2 hours of actual necessary work instead of 14. Feed the animals, collect eggs if the chickens are feeling cooperative, they often aren't in winter, milk the cow, muck out stalls, check that nothing's frozen or dying, and you're done by mid-morning. The rest of the day stretches ahead like a prison sentence served in a cold, dark cottage. The animals are suffering too, though they at least have the advantage of not understanding their situation. The cow is producing less milk. Winter feeding reduces output significantly, and you're rationing hay carefully because running out in February means watching livestock starve. The chickens have mostly stopped laying because daylight hours are short and their bodies know this isn't optimal breeding season. The oxen stand in their stall looking philosophical about existence, occasionally shifting weight from foot to foot, generating what warmth they can from their massive bodies. Your sheep are on the common land still, huddled together in that collective warmth strategy that keeps them alive but makes counting them nearly impossible through the morning fog. You check on them daily, looking for signs of distress or predation, or the mysterious ailments that make sheep suddenly decide to die for no apparent reason. Sheep in winter are basically testing your commitment to animal husbandry while providing minimal return on investment. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Winter was genuinely called the starving time in many rural communities, not because people typically died of starvation, but because food stores diminished, diets became monotonous, and the nutritional deficit combined with cold stress made people vulnerable to illness. Spring mortality rates were often higher than winter, because people who'd been weakening for months finally succumbed to infections their bodies couldn't fight. The firewood situation is causing daily anxiety. You spent autumn cutting and stacking wood, accumulating what you thought was enough to last through winter. Now, in January, looking at the diminishing pile, you're doing mental calculations that aren't reassuring. The cottage needs to stay warm enough that people don't die of hypothermia, and food doesn't freeze, but every log you burn is a log you don't have for February, and February can be colder than January, and running out of firewood means burning furniture or worse. You start rationing heat, which means the cottage is cold, genuinely, persistently cold, in a way that modern central heating has made people forget is possible. You wear every piece of clothing you own simultaneously. The children huddle near the fire in a pile like puppies seeking warmth. Your wife has wrapped the baby in so many layers it resembles a small, angry burrito. At night, everyone sleeps together in the loft, sharing body heat under every blanket and spare piece of cloth the household possesses. The food situation is technically adequate, but spiritually crushing. You're eating from the preserved stores now, salt pork that requires extensive soaking, sauerkraut that tastes like fermented regret, dried beans that need hours of cooking, root vegetables that are starting to get soft and sprouty. The bread is increasingly barley-based because you're saving the wheat for later. There's no fresh fruit, no green vegetables, nothing that wasn't preserved months ago. Every meal tastes like survival rather than pleasure. The quirky historical detail. Some families genuinely believed that eating meat on Fridays during winter would cause harder frosts and extend the cold season. This was partly religious tradition, Catholic influence persisting in Protestant areas, and partly folk belief about consumption affecting weather. Did eating patterns influence climate? Obviously not, but it gave people a sense of control and conveniently reduced food consumption during lean times. Your indoor work is mostly tool maintenance, sharpening blades, oiling wooden handles, repairing harnesses, whittling replacement parts for things that will break next season. You've probably spent 40 hours this month working on the plough, replacing worn wooden pieces, checking the iron fittings, making absolutely certain it'll function come spring because plough failure in planting season is catastrophic. Your wife is spinning constantly. That pile of wool from autumn shearing is being transformed into thread, which will eventually become cloth, which will eventually become clothing, or be sold for small amounts of cash. The spinning wheel's rhythmic whir becomes the soundtrack of winter days, accompanied by the fire's crackle and occasional gusts of wind that find every crack in the cottage's construction. The children are going slightly feral from cabin fever. Your son has been confined to indoor space for weeks now, and 7-year-olds are not designed for sedentary existence. He's been assigned tasks, sorting dried beans, carding wool, helping whittle pegs, but mostly he's bored and finding creative ways to annoy his sister, who retaliates with the precision of someone who's been studying psychological warfare from birth. You break up their fights with the weary authority of someone who's too cold and too hungry to care about the details. Outside, both of you, 5 minutes. They protest that it's freezing. You point out that fighting generates body heat, so they should be fine. They go outside, return marginally calmer, and the cycle repeats every few hours. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial winters were characterized more by cozy family togetherness, or by cabin fever-induced violence barely restrained by social norms. The answer varies by household, but you're currently voting for barely restrained violence, because your daughter just hit your son with a sock full of dried beans, and honestly, he probably deserved it. But also, please, could everyone just be quiet for 15 minutes? The darkness is oppressive. Winter days are short, maybe 8 hours of daylight, and that's generous. You're living in twilight, waking in darkness, going to bed in darkness, with a brief interlude of grey daylight that barely justifies the term day. The tallow candles are being rationed too, because making more requires animal fat you don't have yet, so evenings are dark and long, and filled with the sound of people trying to stay busy enough to not think about how much longer until spring. You mark time by small changes, the days getting incrementally longer, barely perceptible but real, the food stores diminishing, very perceptible, the woodpile shrinking, terrifyingly perceptible. Each day crossed off is one day closer to March, when the soil thaws and real work can resume. You're almost looking forward to backbreaking agricultural labour, which tells you something about how tedious winter confinement has become. But you endure. Everyone endures. This is winter, this waiting, this cold, this monotony punctuated by anxiety about resources. Your ancestors did this. Your children will do this. It's the price of agricultural life in England, where winter is genuinely trying to kill you, and you survive through careful preparation and stubborn refusal to die. The fire burns low. The woodpile shrinks. The days pass. And slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice, the light begins to return. The evening routine ends when your body simply refuses to continue. There's no specific bedtime, no clock to check, no schedule to maintain, just the point where exhaustion overwhelms and you acknowledge that staying vertical serves no further purpose. Tonight that point arrives around 9 o'clock, though in winter's darkness it could be 7 or 11, and you'd have no way to know without consulting the stars, which you're too tired to do. The climb to the sleeping loft is a daily mountaineering expedition that happens to be only 8 feet tall. The wooden ladder creaks under your weight, particularly the third rung, which has been threatening to give way since last autumn, but which you haven't fixed because adding it to the mental task list requires energy you don't possess. Your wife follows, then helps boost the children up, each one scaling the ladder with varying degrees of competence. Your son treats it like a military assault. Your daughter climbs with careful deliberation. The baby is simply handed up like a small squirming package. The loft is not a separate room. It's more of a platform, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, suspended above the main cottage area where heat from the fire below rises to provide something approximating warmth. Approximating is doing heavy work in that sentence, because while it's warmer than outside, it's still cold enough that you can see your breath and the baby's nose is perpetually cold to the touch. The sleeping arrangement is communal by necessity. You've got one straw-stuffed mattress, roughly the size of a modern double bed, which needs to accommodate 5 people. The sleeping configuration has been optimized through trial and error. You and your wife on the outside edges, you near the ladder in case someone needs to go down in the night. The children in the middle, with the baby between you and your wife so she can nurse without fully waking. It's intimate, crowded, and occasionally someone kicks someone else, but it's warm, and warmth trumps personal space. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Communal sleeping was standard in pre-industrial households, with entire families sharing beds and often sharing sleeping spaces with apprentices, servants, or even lodgers. The modern concept of everyone having their own bedroom is a recent luxury that would have seemed bizarre and wasteful to 18th century people who prioritized warmth and efficient use of space over privacy. The bedding is layers of wool blankets, some homespun, some purchased years ago, all of them worn thin in places and patched in others. There are no sheets in the modern sense, just the rough linen of your nightshirts and the slightly less rough wool of the blankets. The pillow situation is basically bunched up cloth, which sounds uncomfortable, but which you're too tired to notice. You settle onto the mattress, feeling the straw crackle and shift beneath you, probably releasing a few residents who've been living rent-free in the filling. The mattress should have been changed in autumn, but you were busy, and then winter arrived, and now you're sleeping on 6-month-old straw that's compressed into something approaching concrete in terms of softness. Your back would complain if it had any energy left for complaining, but your back is as exhausted as the rest of you. Your son immediately begins his nightly routine of taking up twice as much space as his actual body occupies, sprawling across the mattress like a small starfish intent on territorial expansion. Your daughter curls into a defensive ball, protecting her sleeping space with the determination of someone who's learned that vigilance is required. The baby makes those indefinable baby noises that could mean anything from "I'm comfortable" to "I'm planning to scream in 90 seconds." The cottage below is settling into its own nighttime routine. The fire has been banked, covered with ash to slow burning while maintaining enough heat to relight in the morning. The animals below are quiet, occasional shuffling and the soft sound of cows chewing cud. Outside, the village is silent except for the wind and the occasional dog barking at shadows or foxes or its own existential uncertainty. Your wife whispers something about needing to remember to feed the chickens earlier tomorrow, and you grunt acknowledgement, because forming actual words requires more energy than you possess. Your mind is already drifting toward that space between waking and sleeping, where thoughts become less coherent and more dreamlike. The quirky historical detail. Some families genuinely believed that sleeping with your head pointing north would cause nightmares and disturbed sleep, while east-west orientation promoted health and peaceful rest. Bed positioning was taken seriously, with complex theories about how celestial influences affected sleep quality. Did orientation actually matter? Almost certainly not, but it gave people something to optimize in lives where very little was controllable. You think briefly about tomorrow. The animals will need feeding, the fire will need stoking, the frozen water trough will need breaking. The same tasks as today and yesterday and the day before. An endless cycle of survival maintenance that will continue until you're too old or too dead to continue, at which point your son will inherit this exact life and repeat it for his own years. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial agricultural life represented a sustainable, community-integrated existence that modern society has lost, or whether it was simply grinding poverty that no rational person would choose if alternatives existed. The answer probably depends on whether you're a historian with central heating writing about farming, or a farmer who's lived it and knows that romantic notions about simple life ignore the constant physical pain, the food insecurity, the high mortality, the lack of agency over your own existence. But right now, pressed against your family in a cold loft on a straw mattress that's probably hosting several ecosystems, you're not thinking about historical debates. You're thinking that you're warm enough, fed enough, and your children are all still alive, which by 18th century standards constitutes a successful day. Your breathing slows. Your wife's breathing slows. The children settle into their various sleeping configurations. The baby fights sleep with the determination of someone who knows rest is coming, but refuses to surrender easily, then finally, mercifully, gives in. Tomorrow will bring the same work, the same cold, the same stubborn soil and demanding animals and endless maintenance, the same boundary dispute with Thomas that will never be resolved, the same calculations about whether the food will last until spring, but tomorrow is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you're horizontal, you're mostly warm, you're surrounded by the small humans you've somehow kept alive another day. And you're so tired. Your eyes close. The darkness is complete. The cottage settles around you like an old friend, creaking and breathing and sheltering you from the winter night. This is your life. This is what survival looks like. And for now, for tonight, it's enough. The sounds of the cottage fade into something softer, deeper. The crackle of dying embers below. Your wife's steady breathing beside you. The baby's small sighs in sleep, all of it blending into a rhythm that's older than memory, older than names, just the sound of family, of home, of rest earned through labour. Outside, the winter wind moves through bare branches, but you're safe here, wrapped in wool and warmth and the accumulated comfort of simply stopping. The day's work is done. Tomorrow's work hasn't begun. And in this suspended moment between, there's only the gentle pull of sleep, inviting you down into that soft darkness where nothing hurts, where nothing demands, where you can finally, completely let go. Your body knows this feeling, has known it since childhood, this transition from effort into rest, from tension into release. Your muscles soften one by one, shoulders, back, hands that have gripped tools all day now open, empty, relaxed. Your breathing deepens naturally, effortlessly, matching the rhythm of sleep that surrounds you. The straw mattress holds you, the blankets shelter you, and all the difficulties of 18th century farm life fade into distant abstractions. Right now there's only this quiet, this warmth, this gentle descent into sleep. And as you drift deeper, let yourself remember that this is what they knew, what your ancestors knew, that after the hardest days, after the coldest winters, there's always this, the simple blessing of rest, of closing your eyes, of letting the world continue without you for a few hours, while you sleep and dream, and gather strength for whatever comes next. But that's for later, much later. For now, just sleep. Just sleep.